Morning everybody, welcome to Solo ReacTalk. This morning I'm going to be reacting to a video requested by Kelly McPherson 8033. It's called the Sankebetsu Brown Bear Incident on the Bob Gymlan YouTube channel. If you guys want to check out the original video as well as Bob Gymlan's YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. If you want to check out my reaction to the full story of the man-eating lions of Savo, also made on the Bob Gymlan YouTube channel, the reaction card is going to be at the top right here. Yes. Let us start with the Sankebetsu brown bear incident. 3, 2, 1, go.
Hi. I'm Bob Gymlan.
Hey Bob.
It was mid-November in 1915, on Hokkaido, Japan's most northerly main island. Then, just like now, it has the smallest population density of any of Japan's main islands. The temperature was mild, and the snow was wet and heavy at the Ikeda family homestead. It was just before dawn, and the oldest member of the Ikeda family was already busy about his work. But his labor was interrupted by a wild sound, which was no doubt a common occurrence at that desolate place. Upon investigation, Ikeda found that a storage shed had been broken into, and that the perpetrator was inside. Ikeda made it clear that he was a human by doing what we humans do best. He said something aggressive, and he brandished a tool menacingly. He had no firearm, not with him, and not in his house. When the trespasser exited the shed, Ikeda no doubt questioned the wisdom of his decision. For an Asuri brown bear reared out, and it snarled.
Oh my gosh, look at the size of this thing. I didn't even know they had such large bears in Japan. Wow, they must be the apex predator on the Hokkaido island, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that. In the comment section, you guys can correct me. Maybe they have tigers as well, but I think this is the biggest carnivore, an apex predator on the island.
Now, he likely expected to see a bear, but perhaps not one quite this large. The Asuri is a subspecies of brown bear, and as far as modern bears go, it is surpassed only by polar bears and is matched only by Kodiaks. Both the Asuri and Kodiak are coastal brown bears, meaning they have greater access to food resources, unlike what you might call a grizzly bear, which is basically a landlocked Kodiak. Technically speaking, the
Hold on. Let me write these things down here. Okay. Kodiak is on the North American continent. Alright. And the grizzly.
polar bear is considered a marine mammal. Therefore, Ikeda was confronted by the largest extant species of terrestrial carnivore on the planet. In short, he was looking at a very big bear. The bear peered at Ikeda, no doubt wondering if his breakfast was interrupted or upgraded. Fortunately, the bear did what a good bear should do. He went to flee, but not before hesitating.
I don't like this. This bear is comfortable around human beings. That should not be happening. If this bear is comfortable around human beings, it will take chances in doing far more drastic things to scavenge for food. Or it's just frustrated and it's angry and it wants to do something. Or it's in heat and it just walks into human territory. This is a problem. This is a problem. It needs to be taken care of. And I don't mean chasing it away. It has to die. If not being killed, it must be sent to a game reserve of some sort. It's just too comfortable with human beings. And this thing is not a toy. It's not a pet.
in which time, no doubt, the man's entire life and notion of mortality flashed before his eyes. After what I'm sure seemed like 2.6 million years to Akita, the beast thought better of it and fled, but not before relieving a sack of dried corn from the storage shed and retreating into the shadows of the mountain cast by dawn's rising sun. And to me, stealing the sack of corn seems like an act of defiance as much as an act of hunger, as if to say, I'll leave, but on my own terms. I wonder if Akita realized how fortunate that compromise was. Akita had no way of knowing that this act of pacifism was not in this particular bear's nature. He also had no way of knowing that he had just come face to face with the devil. 4 days and 5 nights later, the bear appeared again. Akita was alerted by the protests of his only horse. Akita ran to investigate, and apparently his arrival, coupled with the horse's enthusiasm, drove the bear away.
And the fact that the bear is coming back to the same house, the same place, it just shows that it's very comfortable doing as it pleases. It knows the lay of the land in that particular area, and it feels as if it's not going to be threatened by anyone. It has an attitude. It needs to be killed.
Man and horse were uninjured, and I'm not really sure what Akita's plan was. He had no firearm, and I think that's worth a mention because I can't impress upon you enough the absolute iron nerve of any person shooing away in a suri without a firearm. And
in 1915 Japan, I don't know about the government structure on the Hokkaido island. I'm not sure. I'm assuming that Mr. Akita can go to a local police or government officials and just, tell them, like, please give me some sort of weapons to defend myself from this creature. It doesn't have to be a gun. Let it be a sword. Something, anything. Because this animal is brazen. It doesn't care. It does what it wants. And one time it might take advantage of Mr. Akita not really being aware of his surroundings, and it attacks him from behind. He has to have ways of defending himself. I'm afraid that little axe he has in his hand is just not enough. He needs a sword, or he needs a pistol, or if there's a way for the police to come this far in these rural areas to come and kill this animal as soon as possible.
A big one at that. We'll never know exactly what went down between the man, the horse, and the bear, but I think it's safe to say that it was a dramatic encounter, because the very next morning, Akita sent his son to summon 2 matagi. Matagi is a term used to describe traditional Japanese hunters.
Good. Matagi. Okay, yeah, the name is right there. Okay.
Known for their ability to subsist in the wild with very little, and they are bear hunters by necessity, considering that they share the same time, space, and food. So whatever happened to Akita that night was enough to convince him that he needed someone who knew about big bears and big guns. One night and 2 days later, the Akita son returned with 2 matagi. They could not find the bear, as fresh snow was on the beast's side, but the matagi insisted on staying, and not only because of the inclement weather. This move indicates the wisdom of the matagi. I get the sense that they were not confident that the Akita family understood the full extent of their peril.
I do. Did you see the size of that thing? No, you can't take chances with an animal like that. You can't take chances with an animal that's so comfortable around you. A wild animal like that. You can't. It's either you or it's that animal that's going to live. And I choose myself. It has to die. I know there might be some people who are like, oh, it's a wild animal, this is its home as well, and, we have to conserve animals and protect them. Guys, not this one. Not this one. It has to go.
Perhaps they stuck around because they understood the gravity of the situation and the weight of the beast. I can only imagine that the Akita family didn't object too much. Perhaps the bear went elsewhere, or maybe it never left at all, but 10 days after the Matagi arrived, the bear reappeared, angry, in the early evening beneath a bright moon. One shot was fired, and the shot found its mark, and the Asuri fled into the woods. The Matagi tracked it, and there was a great deal of blood left in the creature's wake. But who knows what that means when you're talking about something the size of 5 to 10 men. And though they found a great deal of blood, the fact that its stride was steady in the crisp snow, and that it hadn't stopped to rest, was not a good sign.
It means that the bullet didn't hit a vital area, and it can still fight.
At the foot of the mountain, the two men made camp to resume the trail in the morning. But wouldn't you know it, a massive snowstorm hit. The snow not only covered the bear's tracks, but made moving up the mountain suicidal.
Mount Onishika. Mount Onishika. Alright.
And the Matagi returned to the Akita homestead, and they took their leave, fearing that if they stayed much longer, they would be stranded there all winter. But they offered some comfort before leaving. The Matagi told the Akita family that the bear would at best not survive hibernation due to a combination of its injury and how late it was in the season.
No, you are not certain of that. You are not certain of that. The fact that this bear was able to continue sprinting away even as it was wounded, and the Matagi also realized it from the snow and the blood that was coming from the bear. The fact that it was still moving at a very fast pace, it means that this animal is still going to be well and truly alive. And they should have stayed here. But the problem is that we don't know if the Akita family had enough food to sustain not only themselves but the Matagi, the hunters. We're not sure about that, and that might be also a factor on why they would want to leave, because the resources of the Akita family might not be enough to sustain all of them throughout the entire winter. But at least give them some sort of weapon. I don't know if you guys can give them guns, but give them a sword. Something, anything that is able to penetrate the hide of this animal. Because I suspect it's gonna come back. Give it a week, maybe 2, but it will return.
Or at worst, the bear would forever fear humans. It may not be dead, but now it has bad association with people. Both outcomes were reasonable, but they were also incorrect. It was some 10 days later, on December 9th, mid-morning, on land that belonged to the prominent Oda family. Abe Mayu was the wife of one of the farmers that worked the Oda family's crops. She was looking after a baby that belonged to yet another pair of employees. Little Hasumi Mikio had just turned 1 year old. We'll never know if she had any warning. No one survived to tell. But either the bear entered abruptly, catching Abe Mayu off guard, or maybe it groaned and growled and pawed at the thatched walls. But we know the baby was in the crib when it happened. I can only imagine poor Mayu's frame of mind if the bear made its presence known before entering. Perhaps she couldn't get the baby to stop crying as the rank smell of the beast permeated the hut. Either she knew about her impending doom, or she didn't. For her sake, I hope she had no warning, because there was nothing she could have done. It came in through the wall, which, like the door, was little more than woven hay. She wasn't a mother, but I think something maternal must have kicked in. She had access to the door, but she didn't use it. Instead, she threw firewood and pans at the beast, which was just as brave as it was useless. Little Hasumi Mikio was found in his crib with a devastating bite to the head.
Oh my gosh.
When the wall came down, the poor thing had probably started to cry. His death was instant. But clearly, the bear was after the heavier of the two food sources. After dealing with the infant, the bear turned on the woman, who was entrusted to protect him. She would later be found in the woods, and due to the excessive blood, it seems that her heart had been beating for a good deal longer than she probably would have wanted it to. And this chapter is so difficult to judge, as far as what should have been done. Should is a very tricky word.
I mean, I don't know what she could have done, really. There's no way of her killing this animal with kitchen utensils and pots and pans. There's just no way. And the fact that this place is made out of thatched grass, honestly, I just don't see how she would have been able to make it out of this, her and the child. Even if she was able to take the child and they would run out of the homestead or the house, this bear was going to follow them. This bear was going to chase them down and eat them outside. So I honestly, I just don't know if there's anything that she could have really done that could have, chased away the bear. I think those hunters, really, they should have been far more earnest in trying to find this animal. But, yeah, circumstances.
If she was aware of the bear before it came in, I can't imagine her terror. If she was aware of the fact that the shelter was being investigated by a bear, then maybe she could have picked up the baby and ran. But I think that simply would have guaranteed her fate. The nearest house was 1,000 feet away. Of course, that's through the woods. So maybe she stayed put, in hopes that the walls could deter the bear. Though I can't stress this enough. The shelter to that bear was little more than a paper bag would be to us. Had she tried to run, I think it would have been upon her. So she put faith in the walls, and she probably thought her best hope was to remain very quiet, unless of course there was no warning. And if that was the case, all she could have done was fight. Honestly, I don't think it mattered much. She had no firearm, and there was nothing she could have done differently. Doom took the day. I'm going to comfort myself and say it happened with no warning. Evidence to this is the fact that the baby was in the crib. I think if she knew about the bear, she would have instinctually held the infant in her arms in preparation to flee, and he was found in his little bed.
I'm wondering about the people who live on the island of Hokkaido. When they deal with these types of bears, these Asuri brown bears, how do they coexist with them? If there's a bear like this that is so confident in entering into human territory and even attacking and consuming human beings, like, what do the society there do exactly to deal with bears like this? I'm sure they have machetes or swords, any sort of weapon that can deal with very dangerous animals like this. There should be a weapon like that in the homestead. Because just like in any other society that lives in extremely rural areas, coexisting with very dangerous, carnivorous, apex predators, there are people who have weapons of some sort, of any kind, that they're able to use to defend themselves against creatures like this. Yeah, I'm just, I'm perplexed in trying to understand how is it that people who live in such extremely rural areas don't have their own assortment of weapons to defend themselves, not just from other human beings, but from the wild animals that live amongst them. There should be a machete or a spear or a sword, just like how our ancestors survived in these different locations. They didn't just have an axe to cut down trees. They had weapons to defend themselves from human beings and from wild animals, or else we would not be here if they didn't have such weapons. So how is it that these communities, or should I say these people in Hokkaido, don't have a weapon in their homestead? Doesn't have to be a gun, but something sharp, something that can cut down flesh.
And as tragically as all the rest, it was her husband who discovered the scene the very next morning, some 18 hours after the assault. I doubt he had any idea that anything was wrong as he entered the house. The sun had not yet risen, that side of the house was still intact, and no doubt he took the darkness and the silence as an indication that his wife and little Mikio were sleeping. The hearth would have gone out by then, and any wicks would have been spent. I'd imagine his first indication was a smell, and then a gaping hole in the wall, and then he would put it all together at once. It would have taken only a terrible moment. He found the infant in the crib. His wife was nowhere to be found, but there was enough blood present to indicate her fate. He'd never see her again, alive or dead. We don't know much about him, but we know he used to work at a slaughterhouse, and he said it was worse than that. And you could accuse him of cowardice for not looking for his wife, but perhaps it had been wise not to.
Where was he going to start to look for his wife exactly? I mean, I'm sure it's snowing and probably the snow has covered the tracks of this bear. And even if he found her, what was he going to do exactly? Because clearly people in this community don't have weapons to defend themselves. So what was he going to do?
The little bit that was left of her was buried in a snowbank, protected by a very real monster. Had he gone to look for her, I have no doubt that he would have joined her in that frozen grave. He left the island of Hokkaido by noon that day, and we don't know this for certain, but I'd imagine he never returned. Understanding the fate of his wife, and seeing what he saw, likely broke him in many ways. I hope he recovered as much as could be expected, though I'm not sure how much that is. It's certainly more than I care to envision. But on his way away from that oppressive place, he passed two neighbors. Saito Ishiguro and Mayuki Yasutaro were also employed by the Ota family, and he told the two men what had happened. I'd guess that words weren't coming easy to him at the time. Ishiguro and Yasutaro told the widower that they would deal with the paperwork involved in the death and report. Maybe the bereaved was illiterate, or maybe he simply wasn't in a great headspace at the time. I'm sure his pain was palpable, and that's probably why the two men made the offer they did. And perhaps needing confirmation, the two men went to the gruesome house to see for themselves. And unfortunately, Abe Mayu's husband's account was tragically accurate. But unlike the widower, Yasutaro and Ishiguro had the luxury.
Okay. Saito. Alright. Yoke. Yasutaro.
Of sun rays peeking over the hills. The scene must have been more clear to them than it had been to him. And to make matters worse, it was Yasutaro's house that was only 1,000 feet away. I'm sure it was unpleasant for him to think about the fact that all of this went down merely a 5-minute walk away from his family.
Yasutaro, get your family and get out. Go to the nearest town and let them stay there while you inform the authorities that there is a bear in your area that needs to be killed. It needs to die as soon as possible.
So you could see why this would be most concerning. Mayuki Yasutaro welcomed Saito Ishiguro's family into his home. His house was more substantial than the Ota's, wrought of logs in addition to the traditional thatching. It was closer to the site of the attack than Ishiguro's residence, but Yasutaro's home was more formidable than either the Ota home or Ishiguro's home. The two men endeavored to go to the town of Sankebetsu, technically the town of Tomame, because Sankebetsu was really just the name for the region along the Sankebetsu River. It was only about a 20-mile trip, but I'm going to guess that a century ago, the journey was more arduous than the distance implies, considering their mountainous and snowbound road, especially during a wet winter. Ishiguro and Yasutaro said they would alert the necessary authorities, seeing as their little village of Rokusawa had no police force or imperial office, and the two men assured their families that they would send protection and bear hunters.
Okay, alright. But at least leave them with a machete or some sort of weapon, some sort of sword. Leave them with something to defend themselves with. If both of you are going as the men of this family, who is going to defend the rest of the family? I think one of you should be staying while the other one goes to town and inform the authorities. I don't know why is it that both of you have to go. It's not necessary. One of you can go to town while the other one stays and protects the two families. Or if both of you are going, then leave some sort of weapons behind, just in case.
I know it may seem counterintuitive for the two men to leave their families at this juncture, but it's important to understand that the Saito and Mayuki families thought that the tragedy had already happened. They thought it was done. They didn't realize that the issue was ongoing.
issue, they didn't realize that the issue was ongoing. That's why I'm confused, about the people of this island, or that small community when it comes to these bears. I'm sure they have a long history in understanding the the instincts of these bears and how they operate. What do they do? How do they do it? Where do they go? Like any wild beast that has tasted the blood of man, nothing is ever so sweeter. And it will continue to come and take advantage, or to try and get any sort of meal. It is an opportunist. So I don't understand how is it that the people who live in this rural area do not truly understand the type of creatures they live amongst, especially when it comes to this Asuri bear.
They had many children between them, the oldest of which was Mayuki Odo.
Mayuki Odo.
Yasutaro's son. He was 16. I'm sure Yasutaro beamed with a bit of pride as he granted Odo the prestigious and prehistoric title of Man of the House. Yasutaro knew how to use a rifle, and he had taught young Odo to do the same. But I don't think Yasutaro would have dreamed in his most fevered nightmares that Odo would actually have to use it. A woman alone with a baby, well, that's a tragedy. But an entire house full of people, that just doesn't happen, right? He said goodbye to the rest of his children, as well as his wife Yayo. Ishiguro, too, bid his wife farewell. It was a goodbye for 3, as she was carrying their youngest. Apparently, any hesitation he had about leaving his family was fleeting, for he did just that. Besides, he and Ishiguro would make it to Sankebetsu in just a few hours, and a team of bear hunters and police would arrive just a few hours after that. But the goodbyes must have been brief, as I suspect the 2 men were quite eager to summon someone to kill a bear. Even today, the desolate roads of that wild place are closed during winter, but they arrived at an imperial office at 10 a.m. and swiftly communicated their situation, at which point 50 policemen immediately deployed to Rokasawa, and for the sake of clarity, I've read the soldiers refer to as guardsmen, corpsmen, and imperial police. I'm sure Yasutaro and Ishiguro thought that any threat the bear posed was neutralized as they watched the convoy deploy.
It's good. I like the fact that the government is responding promptly and immediately to this situation. They're attending to it with full force. 50. That's good. That's very, very good. That's more than I would expect, from any government. If it were my country, hey, oh, you would not see that help coming anytime soon. They would give you the runaround, they'd give you excuses after excuse after excuse. And even when they do finally give you that support, it's only 1 or 2 people who are going to come and help you out to take care of this dangerous animal. But here, the government is responding so well. I love it. They're taking this seriously. They value the words coming from these 2 men. And they are attending to this matter as fast as they can. I like that. Many governments need to take this as an example. When the people are calling for help from the government that is responsible to protect them, to serve them, we need that immediate attention. They need to emulate what the Japanese government is doing here, or should I say the local government is doing here. This is nice.
Therefore, the 2 men kept their word to poor Abe Mayu's husband. Ishiguro arranged for funerary proceedings, while Yasutaro dealt with the paperwork. Even in 1915, in places that lack infrastructure, bureaucracy was apparently important. And it seems that the 2 men spent the rest of their day attesting to the death of Abe Mayu and poor little Hasumi Mikio, who never stood a chance. The guardsmen arrived at the Oda homestead at noon, some 26 hours after the bear came into the house. Some went to guard the Mayuki home, and one other home in the immediate region. Some documented the scene of the killing, and 35 of them set out to retrieve Abe's remains, and ideally, kill a bear. The trail was obvious and easy to follow, and the imprinting snow made clear that Mayu's death was not as merciful as it was to the infant in her charge. The guardsmen followed that awful trail for no more than 500 feet before they were confronted by the bear. It was enraged to be disturbed from its slumber. 5 shots fired, 1 hit, but the bear kept coming, and it wasn't until he was 1 pace away that he thought better of it and sprinted off into the bush. Now you may think that a bear would never charge a group of armed hunters, but you'd be wrong, because that's exactly what this bear did. And this, in my opinion, is a testament to the Tempest's hunger, its pre-hibernation appetite. It tried to defend what little remained of its meal. In normal circumstances, a bear would be long gone by the time 35 men could make a visual. 10 men went after the galloping fiend, and the remaining 25 went looking for Abe. The pursuing soldiers found a weak blood trail, so one of their 5 shots must have struck true. Then they came upon a puddle of blood beneath a fir tree, and their hopes were high. But the blood trail stopped, as the wound must have congealed amid the grease of its ghastly fur. And after the puddle where it took a break, the bear's stride only grew stronger. It's unclear whether the men lost the trail, or if they simply hit the point of no return. That is, venturing further into the woods than they could support, with whatever equipment they had on them, which couldn't have been very much, because from what I understand about the area and the scene, there was heavy and wet snow, so theoretically, it would have been difficult to lose the trail of a 1,000-pound bear. So you could ask, why didn't they just keep going? They'd come to it eventually, right?
It would be a problem if they would continue going after it and they don't have the proper resources to sustain this continued chase after this bear. Because it's in the mountains of Mount Onishika, it would be difficult for them to traverse such difficult terrain and also trying to kill this bear, while this bear is perfectly acclimatized to the mountain, and it's perfectly acclimatized to the entire environment, and it knows how to maneuver and to escape being detected by human beings. So yeah, it would be very difficult, for these 10 men to continue on the chase. I would prefer that they would all return back to the homesteads and defend them, because it might not happen in 2 days or 3 days or a week, but within the next 2 to 3 weeks, this animal is going to be hungry. This animal is going to be desperate. This animal is going to be taking any sort of opportunity to go and look for more food. And it's not going to focus on the animals that live in that area. No, it's going to know where it knows best, where it understands that there's food in these types of structures, and that's the homesteads of these families. So I want those 50 policemen to be securing those homesteads. At least, I don't know how many houses are there in that area, but at least 3 policemen for each house. I'm sure that there can't be a lot of people who stay around there, but at least 3 for each house. And then we need to formulate a plan on how to making a trap for this animal to be in a certain area where it can be shot at. We need to collect food, whatever food that is able to be shared, put into one spot. Let it be looking presentable or smelling presentable for this animal to, go there and try to eat this food. And once it's in that position, you take it out. But in the meantime, right now, those 10 men and everybody else who's out on the field, they should return back to those houses, defend those families, because this animal is going to come back 2 to 3 days, maybe a week. It's going to be hungry and it's going to want to eat, and it's going to go back to where it knows best, and that's human dwellings.
Well, brown bears regularly traverse over 50 miles in a day. Pursuing one through snow and slope is a fool's errand, if it's not grievously wounded, of course, which apparently this particular bear was not. And that's just one of those things in any situation like this. Everything's a gamble, a simple matter of cost versus reward. A group of men getting lost or stranded in the mountains would just mean that now the little community has two problems. So the 10 hunters turned around and followed their prince to safety, no doubt before it got too dark. And the guardsmen who did not go after the bear found Abe Mayu's remains, not far from where the bear made its stand. The bear had buried her in a snowbank to save for later. Likely, starvation had shrunk the bear's stomach, and eating too much at one time would have resulted in the bear vomiting. Only her head and legs remained. After what I'm sure was a controversial and perhaps contentious discussion, the soldiers decided not to relieve her from her terrible place of rest, but rather post sharpshooters nearby in hopes of the bear's return. Before
Okay, alright, I get that, I understand.
nightfall, which came early in that time of year, some 30 guardsmen had assembled at the Mayuki home, and they made two assumptions about the situation they had before them. They assumed that the bear would return for yesterday's meal, either Abe Mayu or the infant, and they assumed that the bear, now having successfully fed on human, would do so again. To address the first assumption, 7 of the best shots and most seasoned Imperial police conducted a stakeout in the vicinity of the Oda home, and beside where Abe Mayu received her unsanctimonious burial, 500 feet away from the house itself. Much has changed in the past century, and no one actually knows exactly where the houses once stood, believe it or not, but it must have looked something like this. This is a recreation of the scene.
Wait, let me see. Okay, the Mayuko house, police camp, Abe Mayu's remains, Ota house, infant remains. Okay, and this is the road. And frozen river. Okay.
To the best of my abilities, and this was their plan. 2 sharpshooters laid low behind the wall on either side of the Oda house, and one would wait inside the House of Death itself, in case the beast returned for poor Mikio Hasumi, and an additional 4 would hunker down in the woods, with their sights set on the location of where Mayu's body had been brutally deposited in that frigid tomb. Meanwhile, the remaining 40 or so guardsmen would do the ostensibly important job of guarding the women and youngsters who were tucked away at Mayuki Yasutaro's home. And I think the game plan was reasonable. A large presence of men would have certainly deterred the bear from approaching the living, so the larger group was in fact doing its job. No bear is going to directly confront an army, right?
No, this one definitely would. This one, it has no qualms in attacking human beings. It's not afraid of guns. It's not afraid of human beings. This one definitely would.
Therefore, the bear would be further encouraged to seek out Mayu or the infant. The reek of death would certainly prove too appealing for the beast to ignore, and as it returned for its prize, the smaller group of more seasoned men would end the story. They thought. Those whose duty it was to defend the defenseless had wisdom. The plan was both reasonable and sound. Their assumptions were entirely correct, and their actions were justified, and yet everything just went so wrong. Meanwhile, Ishiguro and Yasutaro found themselves in a less than desirable suburb of Tomame. They had completed their bureaucratic tasks of filing police reports and arranging for Abe Mayu's funerary processions, and it took them longer than they had expected. But they had one more errand to complete, and it was dark by the time they got to it. They were seeking out a man that they had long heard tell of, but had never actually met for themselves. His name was Yamamoto Hikichi, and he was something of a folk hero in the bear-killing department. Having received his address from the police, the 2 men were a bit surprised at the neighborhood they found themselves in, and their skepticism increased tenfold when they came upon his residence, and more still when he opened the door. He didn't seem to have much going on these days. This being real life, they were surprised by the man that stood before them.
He looks retired.
Though if this were a work of fiction, he's exactly what you might expect. After concluding that the two men weren't up to no good, he bid them inside. Meanwhile, back in Rokusawa, it was 8:30 in the evening. The sun had long since set, but the sky was clear, and a bright winter's moon cast the shadows of dead limbs like crooked legs dancing on the iridescent forest floor. The sharpshooters had all been situated and silent for hours, with no communication. Perhaps this was reminiscent of a time not so long ago, when they stood against a very different type of bear.
The Russo-Japanese War. Japanese Empire, Russian Empire.
The one that was no less hungry. Perhaps their bodies had grown stiff, and perhaps their imaginations had become equally pliable. I imagine it would have been difficult to not think about the sights and smells of what they'd witnessed earlier, and that the perpetrator of the grisly deed was no doubt stalking again, though this time hungrier than before due to its escape, and angrier than ever due to its injury. They heard it first. View obstructed from hill, bush, and dark, but no doubt the 1,000-pound footfalls were perceptible, and ominous in their ambiguity. Sound is tricky among hills, and especially with snow on the ground. The bear was no doubt as wary as it was weary, wary from having its slumber interrupted by gunfire only a brief daylight's worth of time ago, and weary from evading its pursuers. And I guess this is the first thing that went terribly wrong on that terrible night. The bear, either through luck or wit, approached from the direction of the Mayuki home. And perhaps it's understandable why they wouldn't have expected that. I think you or I would instinctually agree that a hunted animal would not come from the direction of the 40-plus soldiers. It presented itself directly in between the sharpshooters at the Oda house and the sharpshooters in the woods. Neither group wanted to fire, for fear of hitting one of their own, who were all certainly hard to see by design. And the ambush was specifically designed for this not to happen. But
the sharpshooters who are targeting in the forests to where, what was her name again? I think her name was Abe, right? Abe Mayo, yes, where Abe Mayo's remains are, that's where they are targeting. The sharpshooters are targeting there. And the other sharpshooters who are facing towards the frozen river are, at the house where the remains of the child are, right? So how is it that they would be able to target each other exactly? Because the sharpshooters who are at the house with the remains of the child are targeting directly towards the frozen river, while the other sharpshooters are targeting towards the forest or are within the forest where the remains of Abe Mayo are. So I don't know how are they going to kill each other by mistake in that type of situation, unless if the sharpshooters get out of their positions and head closer to where the bear is, and then maybe they might have friendly fire. But if they stay in their positions and this bear is coming towards the remains of the child, the sharpshooters who are there, they should be able to take a shot at it. Or maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. I'm not accepting this excuse from the sharpshooters that they might hit one of their own if they target the bear that is walking on the frozen river. I just don't want to accept that. Because the other sharpshooters are far in the forest, far inside towards the forest, targeting the area where Abe Mayo's remains are.
Alas, they had underestimated the beast's brass, a folly known all too well for those who engage in the art of killing man-killers. They thought the bear would come from higher elevation, that it would come down the mountain, or possibly from the forested flank.
But you see what I'm talking about here? The bear is heading towards the outer house where the infant remains are, walking on the frozen river. The guns are pointing towards the frozen river. The other guns that are focusing on the remains of Abemayo are targeting towards the forest. How is it that they'll be able to target the sharpshooters who are targeting the remains? The sharpshooters who are at the outer house. How would they be targeting the remains of Abemayo? That doesn't make sense. Or maybe I'm having it wrong here. Maybe I'm not understanding it completely. But if this bear is walking along or on the frozen river, it should be a target for the sharpshooters who are at the outer house. Why would they be able to target the sharpshooters who are all the way up north towards the remains of Abemayo? How would they be able to target them that side? Unless, of course, those sharpshooters get out of their positions and they chase the animal, on the frozen river. Then I would understand. But if they stay in their position, if the sharpshooters at the outer house stay at their position, where would the friendly fire come from? Maybe I have it wrong, guys. Maybe I have it wrong.
But the fiend managed to appear exactly where both parties knew not to fire. The soldiers in the woods didn't want to shoot toward the house, and the soldiers at the house didn't want to shoot toward the woods. Luck was in the beast's favor.
On a clear night sky with the moon out. Okay.
After a long and terrible pause, several shots were finally fired, and likely it was the marksman's hesitations that saved the bear that night. It's unclear if they actually hit it. There was blood to be found in its tracks, but it had also been shot some 9 hours earlier, and could have feasibly opened its wound since. Either way, it took off strong, down the frozen river. The men pursued it, perhaps thinking it was more wounded than it was.
Which men? The men at the outer house or the men who are at the Abemayo's remains? Which ones?
It's easy to see why they may have had a this ends now mentality. Meanwhile, the 43 guardsmen heard the gunshots, and for reasons I will never in the whole of my life understand, every single one of them filed out. No.
What? Why? Why would they do that?
Less than 43 Imperial corpsmen took off after the party of 7 sharpshooters, leaving the women and children of the Saito and Mayuki families entirely alone.
That makes no sense. Why would the commanding officer do something like that? I can understand maybe taking 10 men to go after the bear, but everybody else, why do they have to come as well? That makes no sense.
I like to think that Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson, who 17 years earlier partook in a game of cat and mouse, wherein who was the former and who was the latter was up for debate, and who at this point in 1915 was entrenched in a hole in Turkey, fighting a world war as opposed to cats, got a really bad headache that night, but wasn't sure why. Yamamoto was a veteran of the Russian-Japanese War some 10 years prior, and he had hunted bears before and after that. War failed to destroy him, and so did the beasts of the mountain, but it seemed as if he was doing a pretty good job of destroying himself. Regardless, Yasutaro and Ishiguro told Yamamoto about the attack on Abemayu and Hasumi Mikio, with as much detail as they could muster. Yamamoto listened intently until the visitors had told all they could. Then they looked at him expectantly. Yamamoto said he was delighted by the company and the story, but regrettably, he informed them that he had sold his guns for drink, and he told them he was no hero, and that he couldn't do any good for anyone. He said his days of usefulness were long since past. He'd simply lived too hard and too much. He was no hero, and he wasn't going to pretend to be. At least, that was his attitude.
Well, at least he's honest. At least he's honest. He's not the same man he used to be. He's drinking a lot, and his abilities or his skills might not be as effective as they used to be. At least he's telling you the truth. He's not lying to you, that might cause far more serious problems down the line if those 50 police officers are not able to, eliminate this bear. You don't want Yamamoto to start lying to you. And then once he gets to the scene, he's drinking, he's not serious about killing this animal, and it just causes more problems for the family or the families. So at least he's honest with you. He's telling you that I'm not the same person I used to be. What service you want from me, I might not be able to provide. At least he's honest about that.
Further explained that he was confident that the Imperial Police would keep their families safe, but he was not confident that the Imperial Police would actually take the bear out. He didn't want this beast to safely enter hibernation and simply resume its voracious hunger in the spring, considering the method the bear uses to satisfy itself. Mayuki Yasutaro's wife, was preparing dinner and tea. Saito Taki, Ishiguro's wife, wanted to help with the nightly
wife, Ishiguro, okay, alright.
necessities, but Yayo wouldn't hear of it. She was 8 months pregnant, and the last thing she needed was to exert herself, what with the added bear stress and all. Yayo and Yasutaro's 4 sons were there, the oldest of course being Odo, and their youngest was 2-year-old Umakichi, who was strapped to his mother's back. Saito Taki, her 4 young sons, her young niece, and of course her unborn child, also sheltered in that evil place. Everyone must have heard the gunshots, and I'm sure they were a welcomed sound. Then they heard the soldiers move out. 50 men tracked that beast on the beach of a frozen creek bed.
It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Why would all of them go after one bear? At least some of them had to stay with the family. It's frustrating, guys. This is just frustrating. Because it doesn't make any logical sense.
It was dark, and their boots punched through the snow with every step. It wasn't until they came to the point where the bear had crossed the creek that they made out a clear print, and with a disappointment well known to the hunters of man-eaters, they realized that the trail they were following was going the wrong direction. The prints were coming toward them, meaning they were not pursuing the bear, but following a set of tracks that it must have made earlier, likely when it was stalking poor Abe Mayu. The hunters
Go back immediately, all of you. Go back to your current position, to your previous positions. Go back now.
were wrong to assume that the bear was retreating. The thing was either smarter or luckier than it looked. Again, Yamamoto proudly declared that he has less utility than a sack of rice, because at least a sack of rice can feed a family. Ishiguro adamantly, but respectfully declared that he wasn't going back to Rokusawa empty-handed. And just like that, like a soft breeze on ember, perhaps Yamamoto's eyes breathed life for just a moment. Rokusawa. He was familiar with that place. It was not far from a village where lived a bear who got away. Yamamoto rehashed the circumstances of Abe Mayu's demise, and softly he said that this bear is known to him. In all likelihood, it was a bear that he called Kesagaki, a male, a boar, and a man-eater.
So this bear has been doing these very, painful atrocities on these communities before. Abe Mayu was not the first victim. There's been many others. Why hasn't this issue been attended to? Why has it been left to become to this state after so long?
And as a note, Kesagaki is a rather direct name. It means a light-colored diagonal stripe on the shoulder of an animal. I'm guessing something is kind of lost in translation, seeing as an English speaker would probably never name a beast a light-colored diagonal stripe on the shoulder of an animal. Perhaps a more relatable name would be something like side slash or white stripe. Yamamoto said that if their bear was indeed Kesagaki, then they were dealing with a bear that had killed 3 women that he knew of, 4 including Abe. Separate incidents, all the women were alone, and all the women were in their houses, and he had only ever known one bear to exhibit this behavior, Kesagaki, and he said that everyone in Rokusawa is in grave danger.
I'm so frustrated how this entire situation was just left to come to this point. You know, the Matagi, the hunters, what are they doing? There's a bear that's killed 3 women, and now the 4th woman, Abemayo. Have they been looking for this bear, or are they only going to act when people actually request assistance from them? Don't they go out on their own initiative? Hey, okay. Maybe money is very important. It's a job.
I wonder what the residents of the Mayuki house thought when they heard the gunshots. Maybe they thought it was over. Maybe they were celebrating. I wonder what they thought when they heard the guardsmen move out. I wonder if they knew that every single one of them left.
I don't think they did. I don't think they knew that all of them left. Because if they saw that all of them were going, I think they would have stopped them and told them, at least 5 of you stay with us. The rest of you can go, at least 5 of you can stay with us until this entire situation has been dealt with. And that we can see this bear is dead. Until then, at least 5 of you stay with us, the rest of you guys can go. I think, what's her name again? Saito Take, as well as Ayo Mayuki. Yes, I'm sorry for mispronouncing the name, but I think the wives would have insisted that at least 5 of them, or maybe more, would stay with the family while the rest can go and hunt down this bear.
Those things we'll never know, but we do know that it happened suddenly this time. Yayo heard what she called a grumbling sound, and by the time she turned to look, the bear's head was through a shuttered window. I can only imagine her reaction. Have you ever seen anything so terrible and unexpected that your brain can't make sense of what your eyes behold?
Too bad you can't use that knife just to pluck those eyes, or to just stab their face if it's possible. I don't know. You know, in that moment, it's a surprise, you're shocked, probably you're terrified, you don't know what to do. Yeah. Unfortunate.
Maybe she made eye contact with the brute, and maybe it looked at her, not with hate or malice, but with the same keening want with which it might regard a piece of fish. This wasn't a perilous game of cat and mouse. This was a simple matter of hunger. And then the head disappeared, and then for what must have been a very long second, there was silence, which was promptly broken, along with the wall, and the wall collapsed as it made its entrance. Its tremendous body snuffed out the small wick of an oil lamp. The hearth fell over, and the embers scattered. A pot of water that was being brought to a boil fell, and suffocated the glowing coals, like a cloud covers stars. No doubt everyone was screaming for help, and I'm sure it was beyond their comprehension as to why there was none. Like lightning, Yayo tried to escape with her youngest on her back, and her second youngest clinged to her leg for dear life. But everything in the hut was displaced, and I'm sure it was quite dark. Yayo tripped. The bear fell on her, pinned her, and tried to crush her, and she screamed as it pushed the air from her body. It lowered its foul lips into what Yayo thought would be a bite, but she didn't feel one. The bite wasn't for her, yet it was the most pain she'd ever felt. Little Umakichi, still on her back, had been screaming, but he suddenly went quiet. Then the bear did what Yayo wished it would have done in the first place.
I think that child is dead. The child went quiet, and the bear was crushing on her.
It bit her skull, and her scalp came loose. Odo, the man of
Oh gosh.
the house, went for the rifle which was beneath the collapsed wall, but Kesagaki wasn't keen on sudden movements. It lunged from Yayo and blocked Odo's way, landing on another child in the process. Poor Odo had no choice but to retreat behind a bed frame. Miraculously, the furniture held. The bear slashed Odo and bit his back, but the brute's own weight kept the barrier in place, and it could not use the full force of its jaws. And though Odo failed to kill the bear, the man of the house still lived up to his name. He gave poor Yayo a chance to escape, and she exited from the entrance which the bear had bored. She grabbed all the children she could manage and began screaming for help. That was the fastest she'd ever run in her life. Her scalp flopped in the cold air, and she didn't know if on her back rested a baby or a corpse.
No, I think the child is dead. I really think the child is dead. The fact that the child was on her back, she was pushed to the floor, the bear was crushing her onto the floor, and I'm sure the child's neck or its back has been crushed from that entire situation. I think the child is dead.
He was very quiet back there. Odo had stopped moving, be it from shock or trauma or both. Saito Taki had hidden herself in a corner beneath a blanket. It was all she could do. She was 8 months pregnant, and was incapable of anything particularly fast or stealthy. With her there was her niece, Saito Rakizo, her son Haruyoshi, and Yayo and Yasutaro's son, Kinzo. She commanded them to flee through the same path that Yayo took, quickly, while the bear was still contending with Odo. The girl was too scared to move, so she stayed with Taki, but the two boys made their move, and Saito Taki could only watch as she sent them to their deaths. Mayuki Kinzo and Saito Haruyoshi were both 10 years old, and they tried to make it out, but the bear wasn't having it. Odo was forgotten, and in one lunge, the way was blocked. The two boys were best friends, always had been, and always will be, and they were eaten alive together.
In terms of the family, there's nothing really that could have been done for them. I don't blame them or expect anything from them. I don't expect them to be heroes in this story. I don't expect them to just have some sort of strength to fight off a bear that huge. And I don't expect a 16-year-old child who understands how to use a gun, but I don't expect him to be the one to charge this animal and to shoot at it and to kill it successfully. I don't expect that from a 16-year-old child. I blame those 50 men who left. They left. All of them. It makes no sense. It makes utterly no sense. It doesn't... Strategically, it just doesn't make sense. Especially when their main duty was to protect the family. The second duty was to kill the animal, but the first duty was to protect that family, and they failed. All of them went after one bear. They are the ones who've disappointed me.
Saito Ishiguro was acting as assertive as his customs and culture would allow. He said something along the lines of, "You recognize the danger, and still you won't help." Yamamoto said it's not about wanting to help. It's that he can't. He wasn't the man he once was, and to pretend otherwise would be deceptive, and would only dishonor all involved. Earlier I said that Yamamoto was exactly the man they should expect were this whole incident a work of fiction. But unfortunately, it was very real. And like real life, Yamamoto did not spring into action with a renewed spring in his step, to be the hero he was always meant to be. His spirit was broken, and his mind was dulled, and worst of all, he knew it. The men departed, and this had been worse than a waste of time, for now they understood the full force and fury of the history of malice that stalked their little hamlet. I'm sure they were relieved that 50 armed soldiers were guarding their families. allegedly. Saito Iwao was Ishiguro's youngest born child, and he had been having a nightmare about bears. His mom and dad and the Mayukis had been trying not to talk about bears, lest they upset him, but it was obvious to him that something to do with bears had upset everyone, and he had gathered that a bear must have something to do with why he and his family were staying at Mayuki-san's house, and of course, why all the soldiers were around. He liked watching the soldiers. They were big and brave and dangerous, honorable. He wanted to be a soldier someday. Hopefully he'd get to help people when he grew up. And though that's what soldiers do, and why he wanted to be one, he definitely wouldn't be opposed to that uniform either. Then he felt hot breath on his neck, and his half-asleep eyes furrowed in confusion. He could have swore that he had just woken up from a nightmare. He didn't realize that he must still be asleep. And then the bear came down on him. Little Saito Iwao had never felt pain in a dream before. Rare winter thunder trembled the paper-thin walls of Yamamoto Hikichi's tenement. He hoped those two nice young men weren't going to try to make it back to Rokusawa tonight. The road would be terrible. He chortled about how nice it is to never have to go anywhere or do anything. He filled his cleanest glass with the last of the liquor in a bottle. Weird how he'd never been happier, ever since shedding any semblance of responsibility. Best decision he ever made, he thought. Before the glass came to his lips, his fingers failed, the glass dropped and broke, and Yamamoto sobbed. He didn't know why. He did it a lot these days, and the why didn't matter anyway. There were so many reasons to cry. 50 years of horrors of every kind take far more than booze to keep buried. There was hardly enough meat on little Iwao to even be worth the effort. When the bear heard a whimper, Kesagaki turned to a bundle of blankets that sheltered Saito Taki and her 12-year-old niece Saito Rakizo. The bear dealt with the girl first, guzzling down every morsel like a vacuum with blades. A brown bear can eat some 60,000 calories in a day when preparing for hibernation. This was a very bad time to be calories. Taki tried to crawl for the door, but the bear wouldn't allow it, not even looking up from its meal. Once the girl had been relieved of all easily accessible tissue, the bear turned its gaze to the woman. I think it saved her for last, because it knew that she was the least likely to be going anywhere. In a last-ditch attempt to save her life, she tried to crawl under the bed, but it didn't do any good. Kesagaki was very strong, but of even greater detriment. He was very hungry. Ishiguro and Yasutaro found that the road was closed. Conditions were too bad. The captain wasn't going to be sending any trucks out to haul them out of a ditch, they were told. They'd have to wait until morning. They found lodging for the night, and would head home at first light. And while trying to find sleep in unfamiliar beds, perhaps they thought of the broken man, telling of a brute specialized in the killing of women. Perhaps they talked about it, but maybe not. When they doused their lamp for sleep that night, they had no idea that many of their loved ones were either already dead or very close to it. It's easy to see how this terrible story would invoke all manner of nightmare mythos. So maybe this happened, and maybe it didn't, but it is said that down the mountain, residents of Rokusawa heard Take screaming, and as they exited their homes for a better listen, and the bravest of which headed to that wicked place to see for themselves, on that still night with that particular quietness that precedes a storm, the villagers heard her desperate voice pierce the air.
How is it the villagers can hear her voice or her screams, and yet the 50 police men could not? Yeah, I think this is a tall tale that's been spread around the community. I don't think anyone could really hear her scream or anything of the sort. Yeah, it's just a bad night story. Yeah.
She begged, bartered, pleaded with the bear, and even denied its existence, but none of that seemed to help much. It is said that echoing down the forested slopes, they heard her compromise, saying, "Take my legs, take my chest and face, take me, but let my baby be. Leave my belly and my baby be."
As if the bear understands.
Curiously, the bear granted that wish. The hunters were on their way back to the Mayuki home. It's unclear if they were in a hurry or not. I'm not sure if they had realized that they were fools just yet.
I highly doubt they were in a hurry. I highly doubt that.
Perhaps they heard the screams, maybe not. It's hard to move quietly through snow, and it's hard to know how far their fool's errand had taken them. Either way, a badly mauled Yayo came on them at a run, barefoot in the snow, with 3 children on her heels, and her youngest in an unknown condition on her back. I'm sure she had a few choice words for them, at which point, woman and men returned to that house of death as fast as possible. Even in her condition, I'm sure she was still at the head of the group. By the time they made it back to that cursed place, there was no human voices to be heard, only the sounds of tearing and swallowing amidst greedy breaths as the beast balanced the work of eating and breathing. The guardsmen wanted to light the house on fire, but Yayo demanded that they do not do that. She wasn't sure who might still be alive. Guardsmen covered the only door in the caved-in wall, while other guardsmen shouted and threw rocks at the house, in an attempt to get it to flee and come out into the open where it could be shot. A small group of the corpsmen, who were either the bravest or the most foolish, as it goes sometimes, approached the house to try and get a shot through the window. Then the bear emerged. And just like the sharpshooter's failure at the Oda house, which if you can believe it was only 15 minutes ago or so, neither party wanted to shoot downrange of each other. And just as soon as its grisly head appeared, it was gone, and the bear loped off into the night, holding an unidentifiable piece of meat in its jaws. Apparently many of the men also claimed to suffer weapon malfunctions.
Oh, please. Please.
Thus failing to end the story. Luck favors the prepared, but in this case, luck avoided the unprepared. Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson had dozed off even though it was afternoon in Turkey. He had gotten into the habit of sleeping during the day some 10 years ago, and you can see why that would be a hard habit to break. He was having a terrible nightmare about bears, which was weird because he'd never had an issue with one. His dreams were usually populated by more deviant denizens of the night.
Lions.
He had weird dreams that day, as he was no stranger to stories that lasted much longer than they should have. But I will say, in the guardsman's defense, at 35 miles per hour, that bear was probably gone as soon as they realized it had come out. The guardsman...
As soon as that head pops into visual sight, they should have started shooting. They should have started shooting. If they have any sort of combat knives on them, you start stabbing at that thing. Anything. Prevent it from trying to run away. There's 50 of you.
Made torches of twine, tar, and birch bark before entering the house. It smelled of beast and blood. Yasutaro and Yayo's third son, Mayuki Kinzo, was dead, torn open and consumed. He was beside his best friend, Saito Haruyoshi, who was in the same condition. Haruyoshi was Ishiguro's fourth son, and though much of the flesh had been taken from his legs and torso, he would somehow linger until the next morning, but would pass away before noon. The pair had almost gotten out. Perhaps one didn't want to leave the other. Poor Odo was still conscious, bleeding, still wedged behind his barrier. He saw everything, and he heard it too, and he'd never forget a second of it.
Oh, Odo. I'm so sorry.
His wounds of the flesh would heal, but his mind was badly scarred, and if
it's broken, he's broken. From something like this. Oh.
A few months later, in June of the next year, he'd fall into a river and drown. He fell from a high bridge. You can decide the circumstances behind that for yourself. He was the only one in that house who knew how to use a rifle, and
that doesn't matter. It's a child. He's 16 years old. I'm not going to put any sort of blame on a 16-year-old child. I'm not going to do anything like that. I don't expect anything from him. It's a child. The people who I am expecting a victory from is the adults, is those who have guns, is those who have sworn to protect the people. All 50 of them leaving the house unattended, defenseless. Madness.
His father had been counting on him. I can't imagine his guilt. Unjustified, of course, but that wouldn't make much of a difference to him. Poor little Saito Iwao was alive. He had been bit in the body, but not consumed. I'd guess that Kesagaki immediately determined that there wasn't enough meat on the boy to be worth his time. seeing as there still remained larger prey items to be dealt with. You know, I can't stress this enough. Obviously, we couldn't always get it perfect, but this illustration is pretty accurately scaled. A 7-year-old's torso is not much bigger than the bear's skull, so my guess would be that the bite was exploratory more than anything, if you can even use such a word. He was probably bit, picked up, and shook to determine his weight, and once the bear realized that that just wasn't enough, he moved on. Fortunately, he wouldn't have been conscious to see what happened to his mother. Memory can be cruel, but it can also be kind. He wouldn't remember much of anything from that dreadful night, and he'd live a full life. But no doubt a cruel one, were his aspirations ever satisfied. Saito Taki's compromise was very much honored. The flesh from her legs was torn away, her face was destroyed, and her spine was exposed at the neck, but her belly was intact. I'd imagine at the petitions by a frantic Yayo, a medic performed surgery, and her baby was born that night, alive. It was a boy. But before the sun rose, he was reunited with his mother. Saito Rikizo was beside Take. There was little left of her. Yayo would recover to as full of an extent as could be expected, though I'd imagine she had lingering pains of all sorts. She had been scalped, bit, and compressed, but all that pain was probably negligible compared to the fate of her son on her back. Little Umakichi was bit in the neck. It broke his spinal column, and though he wasn't expected to see the next day, he somehow lingered for 2 years, immobilized the entire time. He would never walk or crawl or play. Those powers were taken from him, and every rise and fall of the moon brought all the pain a boy could bear. 2 of the children that escaped with Yayo were completely unharmed. Her second youngest, Yujiro, had clung to her leg, and he had been stepped on by Kesagaki. His injuries were minor, and according to Yayo, the only survivor of the attack that would remember anything from that night was Odo, other than herself, of course. An unborn child, a mother, 2 sons, and a daughter died within hours of the attack, but 2 more sons would succumb before the end. Now, that all may sound like a conclusion to the narrative, but unfortunately, it is not, because Kesagaki was far from finished. Mayuki Yasutaro and Saito Ishiguro arose from their hotel beds. I bet they had bad dreams, whether or not they remembered them. A diagonal slash in the darkness, growls and screams, and many failures. I'm sure they were eager to get back to Rokusawa. They hoped their families weren't too worried about them, as they were supposed to be back the night prior. The 2 men, of course, didn't realize that there was an awful lot going on back home. I wonder how they felt during that 2-hour drive home. There was literally a small army protecting their families, and yet Yamamoto's warnings would have been hard to ignore. And sometimes you can just feel that something isn't right. But of course, we'll never know their mood. But either way, as they approached their destination, it became clear that something was terribly wrong. Homestead after homestead was abandoned. Not just vacant, but emptied out and gutted. I can only imagine that they drove faster than conditions would have allowed. They finally came upon signs of life at the small school, with all the food they owned. It was one of 2 buildings in the whole village that was made of brick, the other being the hospital. Though no doubt desperate to see their families, the 2 husbands stopped for information. It's unclear whether or not it was here that they learned the fate of their loved ones. In such a small community, I would imagine that everyone gathered was very aware of Saito Taki's fate and that of the children. Either the 2 men were told of what happened, or just that there'd been another attack. It's never fun to be the bearer of bad news. Or maybe those at the school thought it was best for them to figure the news out for themselves.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have the heart to tell them such terrible news. You know, I think maybe they should just go there themselves to see it. Yeah. Painful. Very painful.
Either way, they put the pedal to the metal. Maybe intuition, maybe instinct, or maybe something else told them that they needed to see something with their own eyes, as no words existed to judiciously describe the wrath that their lives endured. But before arriving to their destination, they came upon the Tsuji family home, the last house before the place that Yasutaro once called home, but certainly never would again. There were signs of activity there. Perhaps someone waited by the road, anticipating the men's return, or maybe the way was blocked, but there the men stopped. and it was there that the survivors had gathered. Yasutaro was reunited with his wife Yayo. She was stable and conscious, and had spent all morning getting stitched up, but I'm sure she was very tired. And though young Umakichi lingered for 2 years, he was not expected to see the next day. Poor Odo's wounds were relatively minor, as in, relative to other wounds caused by a 1,200-pound bear, but I imagine he didn't feel much like talking. For Odo, Umakichi, and Yayo, Yasutaro must have had some degree of relief that they were at least breathing, though the same could not be said for his third son, Kinzo, who was in the belly of the beast. I'd expect that Saito Ishiguro had a harder time with it all. His wife was dead. Their baby was born, but would have passed before he arrived. Ishiguro's
My gosh.
fourth son, Hariyoshi, was clinging to life but barely. His grip wouldn't last much longer. And his niece was dead too. No doubt, that one carried an extra twinge of a very specific sorrow. Not only did he fail his own child, but someone else's too. Believe it or not, the majority of the guardsmen had left Rokusawa. Only about a dozen remained. Now, I watched some videos on YouTube, and a network documentary that said that the soldiers who abandoned their posts did so because they believed the bear to be a demonic entity, and that their very souls were at stake, and that their earthly weapons could bring no harm to said infernal entity.
Excuses. Excuses. I don't want to believe that nonsense. I understand that, people can have cultural, inclinations in their lives, and their religions or their culture might influence the way they act and proceed in certain types of situations. But now is not the time. Now is not the time to be proclaiming that this bear is some sort of deity. I don't believe they actually said any of that nonsense.
And I highly doubt this to be the case. I really, really doubt that to be the case. I think it's very easy to make the argument that the larger group did more harm than good, seeing as not once but twice shots were failed to be made due to the fear of friendly fire. Maybe you've experienced this at your job. I'd strongly prefer to work with 2 people who know what they're doing over 10 people who don't. I think the expression is, too many cooks spoil the broth. Plus,
I don't think it's the fact that there were too many cooks that spoiled the broth in this situation. It's the lack of leadership. The lack of leadership. Who is the commanding officer of these 50 men? He needs to be questioned on his rationale in conducting this operation. Because it's a fuck up. It's a mess up. Whoever the commanding officer is had no control over these 50 men. How is it that all of them would go galloping, chasing after one bear? How is it that none of them thought that, let us stay here and protect this family while the rest go and chase after the bear? How is that possible? Who is the commanding officer of these 50 men? He needs to be questioned.
Winter in Rokusawa would have been tight for everyone, and I can't imagine that the Imperial Police Unit brought enough supplies for an extended stay, so I highly doubt that the soldiers left due.
This is more likely. The fact that there might not have been enough resources for all of these 50 men to stay here for a considerable amount of time. That is even much more understandable. Not this nonsense about a deity or a god or some sort of magical creature that this bear is. No, that's excuses. I will not tolerate excuses like that.
To fears of a demon bear, but more likely due to logistics and reason. And I'm certainly no expert on Japanese culture, but it is my understanding that honor is held in very high regard, and that death is less feared there than in most places. So no, I don't think the guardsmen left due to fear. It was probably just a matter of too many idle hands. but it is mentioned that the only remaining imperial police were those who had fought in the war between Russia and Japan a decade prior, those that the sting of death and failure was not new to. Now, much has happened in a short amount of time in this tale, so here's the timeline. Abe Mayu and little Hasumi Mikio were destroyed on the day of December 9th. The attack was discovered early on the 10th, and that's when Ishiguro and Yasutaro left Rokusawa on their errands. And it was the evening of the 10th that the men failed to compel Yamamoto to action, and the 10th was also the night that the bear came for their families. Ishiguro and Yasutaro arrived home early on the 11th, which brings us to the evening of the 11th. Enlivened and deadened, broken but not beaten, the two men spent the night protecting what remained of their families, and probably not sleeping too much. The fact that they didn't end up going to prison for assaulting some police officers means they were better men than me. The dozen sharpshooters were evenly spaced out, between the Ota, Mayuki, and Tsuji house. And I want to make this abundantly clear. Though there was technically less protection, I believe that this method is more appropriate. I would prefer 12 competent hunters over 50 less prepared ones. The night of the 11th passed uneventfully. Perhaps the bear understood that his pursuers had arranged a more effective strategy to repel him, but more likely, Kesagaki had had his fill. Relieving the majority.
We need only wait. We just have to wait. Another week. He will come back. And this time make sure you kill this thing.
Of the guardsmen had an unintended bonus. Back in Tomame, Yamamoto heard tell of the attacks. He was doing what he did best in those days, when he could not help but overhear some men in uniform, speaking in bewilderment about the incompetence of their superiors, and perhaps their own too, and they were talking about a bear. No doubt, Yamamoto expected them to mention Abe Mayu and the infant, but to his horror, he heard them discussing new victims. His ears perked. Saito and Mayuki, they said. Yamamoto was gripped by a horrible recognition, for he knew those names to be that of the men who begged for his help a mere 24 hours ago. Help that he had declined, because he'd rather get drunk about it. No doubt, this forced Yamamoto to reflect on that gloomy December night, far removed from the mountainous forests, and the devils that inhabit them. Rest would not come easily to Yamamoto that night, as his will began to yearn for redemption, more so than the familiar demons that so many of us distract ourselves with. It's so easy to do, even for those of us who haven't fought in horrific wars of centuries past. And maybe that night offered the first respite in a long time that was ushered by a sense of duty as opposed to a bottle of forget. Perhaps he remembered that the fantastic and ancient tales of the hero's redemption are not as fictitious as he'd lately supposed. Something burned within him that he thought had long ago gone out.
A purpose.
Because as long as an ember exists, a flame can be born. Now was not the time for sleep. He remade his acquaintance with a familiar friend, a friend that he'd missed quite dearly, and the reunification felt right. He had no car, but yet another friend owed him a big favor, and was eager to help the cause for reasons apparent, and Yamamoto arrived in Rokusawa before dawn of the 12th. Rokusawa had one road, and it was clear where the problem began. Yamamoto made contact with the police who camped outside the Tsuji home. Yasutaro and Ishiguro were inside, likely asleep at that point. They probably needed it. And to the commanding officer's pleasure, he then requested to be taken to the vicinity of the attacks, and to the policeman's chagrin, no doubt, Yamamoto wanted to go there as his quarry would, through the woods. I can't imagine that the guards who were assigned to take him there were too terribly excited about this task. To walk through the hunting grounds of an Asuri, a starving one at that, with an obnoxiously bold temperament and a human flesh habit, to its food cache. Maybe the bear hunter inspired confidence. Or maybe not. He'd been sober for hours, after all. Regardless, they made it to the Mayuki house without issue. And at that deathly place, Yamamoto became further convinced that this bear was none other than Kesagaki. Half a lifetime of bear hunting had taught Yamamoto that it's not unusual for a bear to stalk human residences, and even raid them for food, in the form of crop, livestock, or even people. But the habit of dispatching a person within her home, and consuming it where it lay, was a behavior known to him through only one offender, and he knew that offender's last atrocity was near Rokusawa, and he knew his name was Kesagaki. He sent his guides back to the Tsuji home by way of the main road. I can only imagine this was to their great relief. Then Yamamoto went on a stroll. He found no less than 8 abandoned homes, ransacked. The villagers had been wise to flee. It would have intruded, whether the inhabitants were present or not, as that clearly hadn't stopped him in the past. Yamamoto decided to take a less predictable path, alone, and perhaps more appealing to a desperate bear who currently considered Rokusawa its hunting grounds.
So he's decided to try and understand this bear as much as possible, and then of course he'll formulate a plan on how to deal with it. I'm hoping that's what he's doing here. But yeah, this is good. This is very good. I want the Matagi, or the hunters, to also be here as well. They need to also be participating in this. I know what Bob Gymlan was saying about, too many idle hands into this situation might cause problems, but we need specialists in this matter. Yamamoto is a specialist, but he's just one man. I want those hunters, the Matagi hunters, to also be present here in this matter. Yeah.
Kasagaki could try to make a move on him, and Yamamoto would certainly have found that most agreeable, for his trigger finger was stiff, and he'd love a reason to flex it. With anticipation but not excitement, alert but not alarmed, and entirely alone, Yamamoto walked those woods, following the footprints of a nightmare. I'm sure he felt more alive than he had in years. This is a sensation that all hunters of man-eaters crave and abhor. The thrill of being both hunter and hunted. Silent on the snow in that pre-dawn hour, sometimes called the Hour of the Wolf. Though the last wolf sighting in Japan occurred 10 years prior to that moment, perhaps one wolf remains, disguised as a calf, Yamamoto thought, as he tried his best to be bait. As the sun considered rising, he was grateful to face a foe that can be killed by something as common and cheap as a bullet. Not all demons are so simple to slay. Could Kasagaki surprise him and overtake him? It could try. Yamamoto liked his odds with the bear better than the odds of the alternative, which was inarguably the less honorable path to death. It was unseasonably warm, though that hour before sunrise is usually the coldest. Yamamoto began to articulate a grave concern that he'd been wrestling with. When the 2 men arrived at his door, he insisted that, with all haste, they must go to Rokusawa at once. Perhaps, just maybe, they would have made it there in time to save lives, and save a true love that was once bonded in life rather than death.
I advise him not to think that way. There's just things that you can never truly be prepared for, or guessing that maybe I should have done this or I should have done that. Really, you shouldn't dwell on that too much. You shouldn't. What has happened has happened. Now we just have to deal with how we can eliminate this beast as soon as possible. Don't focus on dwelling on maybe I should have said this or I should have said that. There's no point.
When the young fathers came to his doorway, had he said, "Then what are we doing here?" and he had rushed to their car with a weapon, handy and unpawned, then just maybe they could have beat the storm and the bear. He knew enough about Kasagaki to not underestimate its will, and he knew enough about life to anticipate the worst-case scenario, and he knew just how quickly the impossible can happen. Yamamoto couldn't change the past, but he'd be damned if he couldn't impact the future. Particularly, the future of a very specific demon bear. Yamamoto hadn't held a rifle with deadly intent for years, and I can only imagine that he was begging to be put to the test. But Yamamoto would not be so lucky, and his walk was uninterrupted, fortunately for Kasagaki. The sun was rising by the time he made it back to the Tsuji home, and he was up to speed now, and he was prepared, because he had a plan. When he had investigated the Mayuki home, he'd noticed a problem, and he had a tough conversation with Captain Suga, the commander of the Imperial unit, and he wasn't looking forward to explaining the issue to the families involved. Yasutaro sat on the floor of the Tsuji home, weapon ready. His face was hot with tears, though he hadn't been crying. His face would have hurt less if he had, but rage wouldn't allow it. He watched his wife sleep, bandaged and stitched. She was beautiful and powerful, more powerful than he could imagine, in fact. He strongly suspected that the sights, sounds, and smells that she had witnessed 1 day and 2 nights ago would have surely destroyed him, or at least transform him into some sort of... well, but not her. She was resilient. That's why he married her. It takes a special type of person to live there, after all. She had refused to go to the...
Yeah, like, no civilization. It's out in the wilderness. Very quiet and dangerous now.
hospital and take the kids there, which was wise. Before antibiotics, hospitals were primarily where you went to die. The medic came in regularly to change bandages. Yes.
I mean, I can imagine if they did go to the hospital, they might have contracted some sort of sepsis. Yeah.
Sataro's youngest, Umakichi, had sustained a bite to the neck, and he was not long for this world. Haruyoshi's prognosis was slightly better, which isn't saying much. He had tried to flee with his best friend Kinzo, who had long since perished. Much of Haruyoshi, too, was inside the beast. The bear had taken most of the flesh from his legs, and he had sustained a bite to the face, no doubt to stop his protests. But the friends would be reunited soon, as Haruyoshi was soon to pass. The poor kid. Yasutaro's oldest son, Odo, was out hunting the bear. Yasutaro feared that something was wrong with the boy. His wounds had been miraculously superficial, considering what he had endured. But Yasutaro worried that something deeper was wrong with the boy. But then again, he supposed that something would be more wrong with him, had he not been disturbed by the nightmare that unfolded before his waking eyes. Odo would have to process his mental wounds at a later point. For now, whatever kept him busy was probably a good thing. Yasutaro had spent his whole life knowing that revenge should never be motivation, but now he wasn't so sure. He couldn't imagine how fast it all must have happened. Worse still, he thought about how different things would have gone had he and Ishiguro been there. What if he'd been there and was still unable to stop the beast?
Well, that is highly possible. That is still highly possible, but there's no point in dwelling on it. There's no point. Like I've stated before with Yamamoto, what is done is done. What is done is done. We need to focus on the present. We need to focus on the future. And dwelling on what, if I was here, maybe things would have been different or maybe not. There's no point in any of that now. This beast must die. That's all you should be worrying about right now. How are we going to kill it? And after killing it, skin it.
He wished he'd been there, if for no other reason than for the bear to take him and spare someone else. Was he a fool for leaving Rokusawa? Surely he couldn't be blamed for assuming that the police would keep his family safe. But of course he blamed himself. He would never forgive them, not a single one of them. Ishiguro made a whimpering sound. Yasutaro loved Ishiguro every bit as much as he loved Yayo. They'd been the best of friends since childhood, just like their 2 sons, who were now friends somewhere else. Ishiguro was hurting. Yasutaro couldn't tell if he was asleep or not. He'd just been very still, all night, and quiet, aside from an occasional soft moan. Ishiguro was more traditional than Yasutaro. He'd always been an admirer of the time of the shogunate, where strength, power, discipline, and self-sufficiency were admired above all else. But little good it did. He lost everything all the same. It had obliterated Ishiguro that he hadn't been able to see his wife, baby, or son before they were taken to Tamame. But Yasutaro was grateful for that. It's much easier to not see something in the first place than it is to unsee it, and that wouldn't have been a fitting final memory. Yasutaro winced, just imagining the pain his own wife had endured. He could only imagine that Ishiguro was doing the same, only it must have been a lot worse. Both the 2 fathers had lost a son in a nearly identical fashion. What a horrible trait to have in common, he thought. But Yasutaro would grieve later. Now was the time for the living. He had to be strong, strong for everyone, strong for the living and the dead. His musings were interrupted by a knock at the door. He was expecting a surgeon who was going to do whatever could be done for little Haruyoshi and little Umakichi. But when he opened the door, he saw a face that he didn't expect.
Yamamoto.
That silly little dotard from Tomame. That hunter whose mind had turned to tempura, battered and fried. His eyes narrowed as he began to contemplate how different everything might be had he and Ishiguro come straight home instead of wasting their time on this udon noodle. Surely the nation's premier bear hunter would have at least had the wisdom to say, "So why are you here when you should be there?" Yamamoto asked if he could come inside. They needed to talk. It's unclear just exactly how the conversation in that home transpired. Maybe Yamamoto confided his shame, warranted or not. Maybe forgiveness was offered. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was by some but not by others. It's easy to see how it would be difficult to think reasonably about this most unreasonable situation. Maybe they saw a long-buried, but now unearthed wisdom in the curious man. But maybe not. We'll never know. But I'm sure he had a resolute but distinctly dour countenance as he explained his purpose for knocking. You see, Taki and the children had all been transported to Tomame for burial. The ground was frozen, and there was no cemetery in Rokusawa, and it's unlikely the bodies would find any rest there anyway. Yamamoto told the families that the bodies must be returned at once. He said that Kesagaki was quite literally starving to death, and that the smell of a guaranteed food source would prove irresistible, especially a food source that already carried his odor. The Mayukis condemned this thought. They refuse, emphatically I'd imagine. But Yamamoto said it is already in motion, as time is of the essence, and Captain Suga agreed. Perhaps Yasutaro raised a fist to smite this little cup of sake, and maybe it was Ishiguro who stayed his friend's hand. Ishiguro, who lost more than most can ever know, in a way that none can ever imagine, realized that the horrors of the past 3 days had been Yamamoto's entire life, and throw in a couple wars there too. If indeed, sacrificing that which has already been sacrificed is the most assured way to end the bloodshed, then it must be for the best.
It must be. It must be for the best. I understand how painful this is, and that, you don't want to trust in what Yamamoto is saying after all that he had said before. But we need to find a way to lure this creature into a specific spot, and then finally take it out. We need to do that. Or else it's going to continue to rampage this community until there's no one left to stay here.
Ishiguro knew that his late wife would have wanted to protect others in the final way she could. She'd already given her life to the bear. Perhaps she'd offer her body to help take its life away. All anyone can ever do is try to right that which is wrong, and that seemed to be Yamamoto's only intention. But whether or not the bereaved actually agreed to the plan, it was already in motion. And so the victims were once more moved. From Tomame back to Rokusawa, they were on their way home. I'm sure Yamamoto made it clear that the work of the day would not involve the Mayukis or Saitos, the living ones at least. So perhaps it was a good thing that the two men had a prowling bear to contend with. At least they could keep busy, as they stayed with rifles ready at the home that now housed what was left of their families. I can only imagine that both men, though perhaps particularly Ishiguro, were really hoping that the bear would try it once more, for a final time.
Oh, definitely, it's going to do it. You just have to be patient. Once that hunger sets into the bear, it's definitely going to come back here. Be ready. Be prepared.
Meanwhile, Yamamoto called off the sharpshooters from the Mayuki house while the bodies were in transit, in hopes to dissipate the scent of man. A brown bear's sense of smell is far superior to that of even a bloodhound. Therefore, you can never be too careful. Once the controversial cargo arrived, Yamamoto, Captain Suga, and 3 other soldiers personally escorted the savaged remains into the House of Death, and in doing so, masked their own scent as much as possible. They had no support nearby. They wanted to make Kesagaki's meal as inviting as possible. And so the 5 men arranged themselves in that little nightmare, with Taki and the children, the air still thick with the scent of beast and carnage. The plan for the night was clear. The 5 hunters would wait for Kesagaki, and once he came, they would shoot repetitively. Yamamoto and Suga had fortified the Mayuki house. They blocked the main door, leaving only the entrance that the bear had used the first time, and they used debris to strengthen the walls to a point where the bear could still likely get in, but it would take enough time for the men inside to reposition and fire. However,
Do they have bayonets that they can, connect also to their guns, to their rifles. I think they're going to need something like that as well. Just in case if they do run out of bullets, they can start stabbing at this thing.
Yamamoto was extremely clear that no one was to fire unless a definitive and killing shot could be dealt. I'm not sure if it was said here, but I know it's been said before. Don't fire until you can see the whites of his eyes, or in this case, the black beady chasms. Yamamoto instructed that nobody is to shoot until at least one of the bear's feet has made contact with the ground inside the house. I think this is because then the bear would have to back out to escape, which would offer plenty of time for shots. If they simply waited until they saw the bear, it might be able to dart away in a flash. Of course, perhaps the downfall of this strategy is that if they're waiting for the bear to come inside, perhaps then it would be inclined to come further in instead of out. They were in that awful place for hours, silent. Then they heard movement, and then a foul smell confirmed their suspicion. There is little between the sky and the void as unsettling as a large animal that can get close to you without you knowing it. And though that isn't a bear's particular strength, in comparison to other man-eaters, it is still a competent stalker. All the men could do was wait, in the darkness. Surely each one of them was aware of the fact that they weren't so different from the bait, from the bear's perspective at least. Painstakingly and meticulously, he investigated the walls, sniffing, breathing, and groaning in a way unique to a hungry bear. Maybe some of them wanted to shoot, but Yamamoto insisted, not until they had their shot, not until a foot was inside the house. I'm sure they had a pretty clear sense of where the thing was, separated by only a thatched wall. But then again, sound and space can be deceiving, particularly when the stakes are high and the blood pressure elevates. I'm sure.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Sure every man present was thoroughly aware of the fact that it could come through the wall at any second, just as it had less than 2 days ago in that very place. And surely they could shoot it, but the question came down to how much damage it could do before the bullets did their work. Deathly breath plumed at the hole it made 2 nights prior. As Kesagaki, as all living things do, assessed the risk versus reward of its actions. Guns were trained on the spot the bear would appear, heartbeats quickened, and respiration heightened even as the Titan's nose penetrated that gateway into Tartarus. And even then Yamamoto said to hold, not
until 1 foot is inside. But I would prefer at least two feet or paws are inside the house, with majority of its head and neck being inside, and then you can start shooting. Because it will have to have time to turn around and try to run away to back out of that situation. So at least 2 paws in and a part of its majority of its head inside as well. By that time, your guns are clear. You guys can start shooting.
Until that foot touched the ground were they to shoot, and I'm sure the bear's caution made this a difficult call. And then Kesagaki left. Yamamoto indicated for all to stay put, and to not break cover or go after the bear, in hopes that he was still investigating, and that in time the smell of meat and greed would get the better of him. But
it will. He might leave now, and he might not come back tonight, but eventually he will return. We just have to be patient. This creature will be hungry again. Seriously hungry and desperate. And since it's an opportunist and a creature that has no fear of human beings, I'm sure it will come back here again. We just have to be patient. No need for us to rush to kill this thing.
It was not to be, and the bear did not return that night. And as December 12th turned into December 13th, Kesagaki was still very much at large. And like so much of this narrative, this chapter is just so hard to judge without having been there, which of course no YouTube commenter was. I'm inclined to think that they would have had a fairly precise idea of where he stood, and that 5 men shooting with that caliber, which to my understanding would have been something like a .303, should have had a pretty darn good chance of inflicting some serious damage.
Yeah, but we're not truly sure that, it would have been within the sight of these guns, even if it was like behind a dividing wall. We're not really sure whether those bullets would have hit their target. We need visual confirmation. We need at least a partial part of its body to be inside so that we have clear understanding on where we're going to target this animal, where we're going to kill it. You know, they didn't get that chance tonight. It's fine. We just have to be patient. It will come back.
But then again, Kesagaki had already been shot at least 2 times that we know of, and perhaps that only made him more desperate, and therefore more reckless, and thus more dangerous. I guess the closest comparison I have to that would be fishing. When you feel a nibble, your impulse is to set the hook immediately, but oftentimes you'll do so too early, and the fish will flee. And sometimes you wait too long, and the fish loses interest, and you lose your chance entirely.
But in this case, this fish or this bear cannot afford to lose interest. It is hungry. There's nothing else to eat around it but what it has enjoyed before. There's nowhere for it to go to look for food. It's going to go to where it knows best. We just have to wait.
My guess is that Yamamoto was confident that the bear only retreated and would circle back for a second investigation after regaining his nerve. But unfortunately, he didn't. At dawn of the 13th, Captain Suga and his best sharpshooters and trackers followed the bear. But Yamamoto didn't go. He said it was useless, and it seems he was right. The bear had crossed the frigid but not frozen river, which is indicative that it knew it was being tracked, and knew that the trackers aren't fond of flowing freezing water. Also, crossing the freezing river indicates that the bear was by no means on his last legs. And indeed, Captain Suga and his men had no way to cross it other than wading through it at a shallow point. And I think this is such a good representation of how this bear was a half-ton all-terrain vehicle. It can get to where people cannot follow, at quadruple the pace, and it knows where it can't be followed. Meanwhile, Yamamoto busied himself by investigating the area. Unlike Captain Suga, he knew that going after a healthy bear was a fool's errand, and he also knew that sooner or later the bear would come to him. He found no less than 8 abandoned houses. All of the storage sheds had been broken into, and though the fleeing inhabitants had taken all food with them, the storage sheds had been broken down anyway, no doubt from the lingering smells and crumbs. Yamamoto knew that had these villagers not abandoned their homes, they would have been in grave peril.
Indeed.
Rifle or not. And I think it's important to keep in mind that this bear has already been shot twice that we know of. Obviously, even modern means of war have their limits against the savage hunger that breeds a hunter of humans. By afternoon of that day, the 13th, 84 hours after the attack on the Mayuki house, a literal act of humanity happened. Countrymen arrived to Rokusawa in legion. News spread slower in out-of-the-way places, especially over a century ago. But over 200 people arrived. Matagi from the north, fishermen from the coast. Veterans, doctors, specialists, off-duty police, anyone with a skill and a day to spare to help neutralize this assault on human dignity and treat the bodies and souls of those who survived it. Yamamoto and Suga crafted a plan. They selected 60 of the most qualified riflemen, which still left plenty of guns in the hands of those who had come to aid the people who remained in Rokusawa. Suga knew that this bear would have to cross the river at some point, so he did something wise. He and Yamamoto positioned the marksmen all along the shore, opposite side from the bear, speckling the river. I don't know how long of a distance they covered, or how much space was in between each man, but as long as they were shooting at the water, or the opposite shore, there was little fear of crossfire. Each hunter entombed himself in a turret of ice, in a way familiar to those who fought the bitter war to deny the Tsar a warm water port in the Pacific 10 years prior. And on the day of the 13th, it was Captain Suga who did something rather clever. He constructed bridges of rope across the waterways, in the style of traditional ice climbers, and I can't say I envy those who had to secure the bridges on the wrong side of Bear Mountain. The bridges were made so that quick pursuit could be given should the bear be wounded and try to escape. Suga knew what all military men know. Deny your enemy a safe fallback position.
Good. Very good.
Into the evening, Suga made the rounds up and down the line, all the way back to the houses in Rokusawa, and then back up the river. It was 10 p.m. when Suga was still making his rounds, and one of his men, a sniper by trade, stopped him and asked his opinion on a particular shadow across the river. At first he thought it was nothing. They thought it was a black patch of mud or rock against the snow, and he went to continue his walk, but then he did a double take, and the sniper was probably like, right? Then they stared at it for a long time, and it was motionless. Finally, Suga shouted, "If you're a person, identify yourself at once, because I'm shooting in 3 seconds." There was no movement and no response. Suga gave the order to shoot. The gunshot cracked the night, and the black mass retreated like a bat out of hell. If it was only a shadow, it was a shadow that whimpered and bled. And this is a perfect example of a situation where 1 or 2 guns is more valuable than a dozen. A career marksman with a single line of fire, who's no stranger to such things, seems far more valuable than 30 police waiting to be put into formation. Suga and the sharpshooter crossed the bridge that suspended over the freezing water, no doubt with a bit of trepidation, as a wounded beast will only run for so long. But it was clear that the sniper's shot was true, as there was much blood to be found on the snow, though the bear's tracks told the story of a bear that had no trouble running. Suga was disappointed that the bear had once more eluded extermination, and he wanted to pursue it immediately, but
No, don't pursue it. Don't go further deep into its territory. There's no point in doing something like that. You are at a disadvantage while it is at an advantage over you. Don't do that. Stay where you are. Like I stated before, it has nowhere to go to look for food. We need only be patient. It will come back.
Yamamoto arrived on scene, alerted by the gunfire. He looked at the tracks and the blood patch for a long time, and I can only imagine Suga's impatience, knowing that every second counts in a chase. But Yamamoto advised against it. Morning would be better, he said, and Captain Suga complied. And I think this indicates the level of respect that Yamamoto commanded. Even after having been part of Yamamoto's failed death house plan, Captain Suga, the ranking imperial officer on scene, took Yamamoto's advice. The next morning, on the 14th day of December 1915, Yamamoto rose with the sun, but he was in no hurry. Once the teacups were empty and the sun could be seen rising above the trees, Yamamoto and 2 policemen set out after Kesagaki. He had wanted to go alone, but it seems as though even Captain Suga's respect had its limits. So he was accompanied by 2 soldiers, who no doubt were there to ensure that the deed was done. Crossing the bridge shattered icicles with every step. Perhaps the guardsmen had their weapons ready, for fear of the bear's sudden fury, but not Yamamoto. He knew from last night's scene that he'd be doing the attacking from now on. Yamamoto would later say that it was following this trackway that convinced him beyond doubt that this bear was in fact none other than Kesagaki, a bear that he had failed to kill 4 years ago and had consumed 3 women prior to this December. All 3 women were separate incidents, 1 taken from her home and 2 within the home itself.
I mean, if Yamamoto has failed in eliminating this bear, what about the other Matagi? The other bear hunters. Where are they in this story? Why haven't they been trying to track down this bear and eliminate it? I don't know if the Matagi who went to help out the Ikaida family, whether they understood that this was Kasaragi. I'm not entirely sure if they knew if this bear was Kasaragi, but there must have been some Matagi who heard the stories of this particular bear that's been killing women in their homes. Why haven't there been any sort of organization of these Matagi to find this one particular bear, to eliminate it? Not just Mr. Yamamoto. Anyways.
And I wish I could find the details on this, but I can't. So I don't know exactly what it was about the tracks that Yamamoto recognized. I don't know if it was a track feature, or maybe a behavior displayed. But either way, something about that trackway was familiar to him. Snowflakes began to fall, not the vicious face-whipping kind, but the kind that take their time through indeterminate direction. and after several miles, Yamamoto laid eyes on the bear. He was sleeping between the roots of a great tree, head reared outward, an orientation indicative that the bear is prepared to run. And Yamamoto knew that this time, the bear's intention wouldn't be to run away. It couldn't. Kesagaki was done fleeing. Yamamoto shrugged off his attendants, and silently stepped to within 60 feet of the bear. So faint were the silent steps that Kesagaki was not alerted to his foe's approach. Yamamoto shot once, and he hit its heart. The bear rose, he roared and charged, certainly now aware that the enemy was upon him. But he didn't have long to think about it, because the next projectile tore through his brain, and he died beneath a sycamore tree.
Good. Very good.
Kesagaki was never photographed, but he would have looked much like this. This is an Asuri that was rescued from a roadside attraction, and he was considered malnourished. You can see by the hips. Kesagaki weighed 750 pounds and stood 9 feet tall, which, as you can see here, appears quite dramatic in comparison to human children. 750 pounds is extremely light for a bear of this size. Ironically, if the bear was bigger, this problem probably would never have happened, because he wouldn't have been starving. Between the sunrise of December 9th and the sunrise of December 11th, the bear was directly responsible for 7 deaths. The infant, Hasumi Mikio, the Ota employee, Abe Mayu, Mayuki Kinzo, son of Mayuki Yayo and Yasutaro, Saito Haruyoshi, son of Saito Taki and Ishiguro, Rikizio, niece of Saito Taki, Saito Taki, wife of Saito Ishiguro, and Ishiguro and Taki's youngest. All 7 of these people perished while the bear still drew breath. Technically, Saito Haruyoshi and the infant survived the attack, but neither of them made it past noon of the next day. The way I see it, these 7 lives were indisputably taken by Kesagaki. But I would also include Umakichi, who was strapped to his mother's back when the bear pinned her. Umakichi survived for just under 2 years after the attack. He was bedridden and immobilized for the rest of his life. He had been bitten in the neck. I'd guess that the bear didn't pierce any major arteries, so they managed to stop the bleeding, but the force of the bite likely broke or fractured his spinal column, which simply would have rendered daily function impossible, and therefore ceased development altogether. I would also include Odo, who recovered from his wounds, but fell from a high bridge into a river the following spring. The circumstances behind that are unknown, but I think we can all speculate. I definitely understand why many wouldn't include Odo, but that's just how my brain works. But by any definition, I would include Umakichi, who inarguably perished from his wounds. And according to Yamamoto, the bear was known to him, and had slain 3 additional women. So the way I see it, Kesagaki's count is at 12. I've read and listened to several accounts of this narrative that say that Kesagaki killed 6 people, and I'm not really sure where they get that number. I guess they don't include the unborn, Yasutaro's 2 sons, and the 3 women who fell victim to Kesagaki according to Yamamoto. But I include the youngest Saito in the count, and to me that's obvious, as well as Umakichi, who I think would be considered a victim by any interpretation. And as far as poor Odo is concerned, no details exist other than that he fell from a high bridge. But being conscious during the consumption of a wailing pregnant mother and multiple children, I think it's a safe bet to say that he fell victim to the bear, by memory, if not by tooth. Survivor's guilt is a very real thing, and it's a dangerous thing. And I also feel reasonably confident in Yamamoto's report of 3 additional women. You don't really have to take Yamamoto at his word. It seems obvious that this wasn't this bear's first rodeo. This kind of...
I mean, clearly it's not, because it's... when it attacked the Akaida family household, well, not really attacked, but it was scavenging for food in the shed. Clearly, this animal has done this before. It understands the structures that hold food. It understands that this place is being inhabited by human beings, and it's not afraid of entering into these places. Therefore, it has been doing this multiple times, and it has succeeded multiple times. And that is why it probably thinks that, I can do this multiple times without any, any sort of problem coming towards it. Yeah, it's done this multiple times.
Behavior takes time to develop.
Exactly.
So I see 12, not 6. And if that number is wrong, quite frankly, I'd be inclined to go up, not down. We know that Mayuki Yayo made a full recovery. We know this because a researcher came to discuss this incident with her in the late 50s. Assuming that she was somewhere between 25 and 35 when the events occurred, she would have been around 70, and she was alive and well, but refused to talk. And it is said that she chased the journalist from her property. The fates of Yamamoto, Ishiguro, and Yasutaro are all unknown, and this space of 3 days is all that's been recorded of the famous bear hunter. There are a good amount of blanks in this case, because all the police records were lost to time, but a forestry worker endeavored to make an official record of the case in 1961. He tracked down the few who were present in the region during the time of the incident. Mind you, this is almost half a century later. He found many who remembered, but only a few who were directly involved, and not one of them would speak about it. Not a single one. 40 years is a long time for people to move on from that which they were probably eager to move on from. The researcher concluded that an entirely accurate sequence of events is impossible to determine, but everything I mentioned here seems to be what's mutually agreed upon. But there are 2 conflicting points that are worth mentioning. One is that Hisumi Mikio was 6, not 2, and the second is that Mayuki Odo was actually a guardsman who was charged with protecting the house while the other soldiers tracked the bear, and the fact that he had the same last name as the family is a coincidence.
I don't know about number 2, but number 1, it doesn't matter whether he was 6 or 2 years old. The result is still pretty much the same against a bear like this.
I find this unlikely because if he was just one of the soldiers there, I kind of doubt he would have been in the house. There was a whole camp set up in that area, and I don't think one of the soldiers would have been in the house with the women and children. But I could be wrong. And I guess the confusion comes from the fact that sometimes he was referred to as a guardsman, with a rank and title, but I think it's very possible that the soldiers deputized him or something like that. But as always, forgive me my liberties. Obviously I mention things that can't actually be known, but everything I said seems like an accurate interpretation of events. An example of a liberty I took would be when I said that Yamamoto heard about the attack at the Mayuki house at a liquor store. I don't know that, but I do know that Saito and Ishiguro went to him for help the night prior, and that he had refused, claiming he was a useless drunk, and he proudly claimed to have sold his guns for booze, and by all the existing, if not limited accounts, Yasutaro and Ishiguro found Yamamoto rather appalling, so I figured that would be a likely place for Yamamoto to hear about it. And as a side note, that was something I struggled with from a narrative perspective. I didn't really know how Yamamoto fit into this. He's a rather enigmatic character. On one hand, he killed the bear, but it kinda seems like it was more or less over by that point. But I don't know. We do know that the community was greatly relieved by his arrival on scene. The only particularly useful thing he seemed to do in his role as hunter was advise against tracking the bear while it was still healthy, which I found kind of interesting. Because John Henry Patterson, the slayer of the Savo lions, mentioned how much time he wasted over that year trying to track them. He said it was simply impossible because even if he found them, they could simply slip away before he ever got a visual. And in the end, he learned that he had to make the man-eaters come to him. A predator can be both the cat and the mouse in the game of cat and mouse. Another example of something I obviously didn't know is that Yasutaro granted his son Odo man of the house status. But you know that happened. That's called humanity. So those are the only kind of details I ever expand upon to further develop the story. See, this comment kind of bothers me. On my Lions of Savo video.
Over-dramatized? Over-dramatized. Okay.
Over-dramatized. Emphasis on over, apparently. These are pretty dramatic things to happen, and to remove the human element from anything this devastating is to deny the story accuracy. However, I would never embellish upon narrative elements directly related to the incidents at hand. For example, dear Saito Taki pleading for the bear to take her, but leave her belly alone. That's established, as well as the infant's miraculous birth, short life, and tragic end. So you could say I dramatized this, but you know, love moves the world. It kneels before it. And to deny this tale the internal struggles of mankind would be to deny this story its authenticity. But that's just how I see things, in my forever struggle against nihilism and nihilists alike. So I certainly cannot guarantee that every piece of this story is correct. But everything in this video is either what happened to the best of my knowledge, or I filled in the blanks with feasible circumstance. And I've heard a lot of sources say that people were tight-lipped about this incident because in Japanese culture, it was considered disrespectful to give the lurid details of such things, especially to parasitic view-seekers. And I always find that funny. I don't think that's specifically a Japanese thing. You'll often see this in documentaries about food. They'll say something like, "Food holds great significance to the people of Spain." And it's like, that's crazy, because I've heard the same thing about America and Korea and France and China, Brazil and Thailand. I've never heard someone on a cooking show say, "Yeah, here in Portugal, we don't really care about food." It's almost like food is important everywhere. And just like food, respect is universal to the human experience. Or it should be, at least. All I mean to say is that not everything is a matter of culture. Some things are distinctly human. Another thing I struggled with about this narrative was simply the times. This was a weird decade. You know, this was a time when cavalry charges with swords and lances were in the same battles as artillery and repeating guns. So it was a strange time for the world, and Japan was no exception. For example, Japan was mass-producing cars by 1911, and it seems that it was not uncommon for people to live in a place like this, dress like this to take care of the horses, but then put on a suit to drive to work in the morning. You know, I guess I mean that it was like a weird in-between time. Perhaps not unlike what we're in now. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about bears. Literally the last time I checked before researching this video, there were 2 species of brown bears, the Eurasian and the North American brown bear, and then each had their subspecies. That no longer seems to be the case, and now it's just the brown bear, and all the subspecies are of the same species.
That's a lot of subspecies. Wow.
Brown bears were extirpated from Great Britain 1,000 years ago. The last grizzly bear sighting in California is believed to have been in the 1920s. I mention this because I think it's important to understand that cohabitation with brown bears is nearly impossible unless the space is vast and the people are few and far between. And if you don't...
That's a problem. If there is no way of cohabitation with these creatures, that's a problem. Because I'm always going to choose the side of humanity. I'm always going to choose on the side of humanity. If humanity is going to be developing in places where these animals inhabit, we have to find a solution. We have to make game reserves. We have to make sure that there is a limit to how far these creatures can go and where humans can, further develop land for their uses, for their own personal use or governmental use or business use. We must have a demarcation of what is nature, what is not nature. But if there is an attack by these creatures, I have no qualms. They must die. They must die. We must find ways to control their population, make sure that they're manageable, make sure that they are within a limited space where they can continue to exist. But humanity comes first.
Don't believe me, look at a map of their range. And that's simply a numbers game, less chance of conflict. I'm not really a fan of comparing the sizes of similarly sized things, because the margins are always so close. But many consider the Ussuri to be the 3rd largest subspecies of brown bear, behind the Kodiak and Kamchatka bear, though the differences there are quite minor, mere centimeters as far as measurements are concerned, which makes more sense when you look at a map like this. Kodiak, Kamchatka, and Ussuri are all coastal brown bears, unlike what you would call a grizzly in Yellowstone that has no access to the coast. A really big Kodiak bear and a really big Ussuri are pretty much the same, give or take 100 pounds or so, and this map puts why that is into perspective. Their ranges are closer than it seems. And the polar bear is the largest bear, because it's important to remember that the biggest of bears are coastal, which the Ussuri bears of Hokkaido certainly are, unlike what many call the grizzly bear, which doesn't have access to the coast. The record wild Kodiak bear came in at 1,656 pounds, whereas the record grizzly bear from Montana is 1,100 pounds. Accessibility to the coast adds some 500 pounds to these creatures, and Kesagaki was one of those. I say all of this because I think the weight of 749 pounds doesn't really paint an accurate picture of the creature's size. Granted, that's still larger than 2 good-sized black bears combined, but to weigh 750 pounds at just under 9 feet tall means Kesagaki was skin and bones, by bear standards. A healthy weight for Kesagaki may have been almost double that, and that is dangerous. And the discrepancy between its weight and its goal weight equals danger, and that is frightening because it's desperate. Though starving, Kesagaki was an adult male of the second largest species of carnivora to walk the earth in quite a while, and technically the largest extant terrestrial carnivore, because again, technically polar bears are considered marine, even though their water is ideally frozen. I'd argue that a starving bear is even more dangerous than a sow with cubs.
A bear that has no fear of humans is extremely dangerous, whether it's hungry or not. Any bear that is able to be curious and start snooping around human property or close to human activity is a threat. Because the moment it understands that, nothing's happening to me, I'm fine, I'm hungry, there's some humans there, maybe I can just bite one or two of them just to fill my stomach, that's a problem. We need to instill fear into these creatures to understand that you have your boundary. If you come close to us here, we will shoot you. You will die. Everything else beyond, that's free range for you to explore, to enjoy, to eat. That's fine. But the moment you come into human territory, the moment you come close to human beings, you are probably going to die. That type of mentality needs to be instilled in these wild animals. I don't know if that's possible. But what I'm saying is that if any wild bear is confident enough and it feels secure enough to enter into human territory, it's a threat. And it must be killed. No excuses.
Mother bear with her cubs is unlikely to retreat, but she also only wants to neutralize you as a threat, which obviously isn't an ideal situation, but still carries a far greater chance of survival than being digested. I often wonder how many of these types of incidents never got recorded. We tend to think of these things as freak occurrences, but I don't think so. Just while I was finishing up this video, this popped up in my newsfeed. This had a happy ending for the humans, but that's largely due to modern means. I don't know, all I mean to say is that not a day passes that I don't think about our ancestors and just marvel at what they went through. And I try not to squander all the opportunities they've provided for us. And speaking of news, I recently saw an article speculating about how the giant short-faced bear may have delayed human settlement of North America for thousands of years. And I guess it's just weird to me that this is a surprise to anyone. The cave bear, which was Europe's largest bear ever, went extinct some 25,000 years ago, and North America's giant bear, the short-faced bear, went extinct some 11,000 years ago. And I think the common factor was human proliferation, but human settlement, human establishment. And to me that's obvious. I simply cannot imagine a situation where there is any safety for you or your food supply with thousands of these guys roaming about. Do you think a continent full of these monsters might inhibit human living space? Absolutely. Look how much trouble a bear a third his size caused against humans armed with the tools of the First World War. Now imagine a bear, thrice Kesagaki's size, with only stone implements to counter him, with all your food being what you could carry on your back, and dark were their nights. Our ancient ancestors were absolute legends. Cohabitation with brown bears is nearly impossible, even with our modern amenities, and if you don't believe me, look at a map of their range. Living among these things, with rocks and sticks, was unquestionably a contentious issue, and I feel like the fact that this is news is indicative of a lack of appreciation of what we once went through. Okay, what could have prevented this horrible thing that happened? I believe I referred to the initial Imperial unit as incompetent, and I don't say that lightly. Trust me, I know things can go wrong, and when that happens, it tends to happen quickly. But tracking a bear is by no stretch of the imagination a job for 50 people, for a lot of reasons. And failing that, the citizens' immediate protection really should have been their primary objective.
Exactly. I've also stated that before, that should have been their main priority, to protect the families inside that homestead. The second important thing was to track the bear, but you don't need the entire 50 men strength of forces to head out there and search out for one bear. There's no need for doing something like that. That's why I'm saying the commanding officer in that entire situation has to be questioned, has to be investigated on his rationale on allowing all of them to head out into the forest to go look for one bear. That just made no sense.
In short, regarding the guardsman, which is a devastatingly inaccurate title, who moved out from the Mayuki home on the night of December 10th, there's absolutely no reason that every one of them should have left. Just a couple men with that kind of firepower would have been enough to deter the bear, if not kill it.
Exactly.
I would say 5 men would be ideal. A bear isn't going to attack an army with modern arms, and that very well may not have been the case in antiquity. But even if 10 soldiers remained at the Mayuki house, I don't think Kesagaki would have tried anything. Even just...
I think he would have. I really do think he's been doing this multiple times. Going into human territory, going into human properties, bashing through walls and attacking people. I don't think the bear understands that those humans had guns on them, really. If he had the opportunity, he would have taken it still. I don't think he understands that those humans had guns. I don't think he understands that those humans would threaten his life. He just sees them as potential prey that can be consumed. So definitely if many of those police officers stayed here, Kasaragi would have still came to this house and they would have been able to kill him. Definitely. I don't think Kasaragi is clever enough to discern that, okay, these guys are actually dangerous, they have guns, maybe let me stay away. No. It would have taken this chance. I mean, it's never been threatened before. It's never been threatened before until it got shot by the Matagi hunters. And even then, still, it felt emboldened to investigate another human dwelling or homestead. It didn't really think about the fact that its life might be under threat. So definitely, even if there were humans patrolling the homestead, this bear was still going to attack. It was still going to attack.
One remaining soldier at the ready would have been a lot more useful than none. I think a couple men who really understood the situation would have been more helpful than an entire brigade of men with little more than good intentions. So aside from that obvious miscarriage of common sense, what else could have prevented this? Well, and this is true for most things, but I think a bit of luck certainly could have prevented this. When the Matagi got a shot at the beast at the Aikida residence, that could have been it. I don't know the specifics of the shot other than it hit. The Murata was Japan's first domestically manufactured rifle, and that was in the 1880s. It was so powerful that it served as a big paradigm-busting middle finger to the traditional culture. Bolt action, something like an 11mm. This could have tore through the bear's heart with grace. So I'm hesitant to say that any practiced skill involves luck. But then in reality land, luck, which I generally think of as positive chaos, has an awful lot to do with everything. And when you're talking about hitting but not destroying, the margin between success and defeat is narrow. Sometimes I'm inclined to say luck has nothing to do with it, but have you ever played darts? Luck. Sometimes it's all you need, but never count on it. A colder winter may have prevented this. The winter was so mild that the bear's temperature rose high enough to raise his metabolism and end his state of energetic conservation. But as for what could have reasonably prevented this, I don't think trying to change the weather is a practical solution, though many seem to these days. I do think that a warm winter in bear country should act as an indication that additional practical precautions are required. Responsibility and competence potentially could have prevented this. So in dangerous places in general, but with no better example than the stomping grounds of any predator that is bigger than you, being irresponsible may not come back to bite you, but it may come back to bite someone else. Aikida, the first family to encounter the bear that year that we know of, didn't have a firearm. And personally, I think it is irresponsible to live in bear country without the means to kill a bear.
Exactly. I've also discussed about this earlier in the video. That I find it strange that people who live in these rural settings, living amongst very powerful, dangerous, carnivorous predators, don't have weapons to defend themselves. I even made the example that our ancestors, at least they had spears. They had some sort of machete to defend themselves from these types of creatures. And yet, for some reason, this family out here in the middle of nowhere with these very powerful, dangerous creatures only have an axe to cut down wood. They don't have any weapons to defend themselves. How is it that they've been able to live as long as they have in this entire situation with these bears, and they have not had any sort of altercation with a bear, to the point where they would think to themselves that, you know what, maybe we need weapons to defend ourselves? How is it possible? How?
And ideally, kill it effectively, because a half kill can be worse than no kill. So in the 2 times Akita encountered the bear in pursuit of food, that's 2 times that the bear learned that its actions had no real consequence.
Exactly.
Because, after those 2 times it went unchallenged. Even if it does suffer a consequence later, it still knows there's a chance to get away with it scot-free.
Yes.
Which essentially means it's learned to gamble. And you really don't want a bear gambling with your life.
You don't. That's why I'm saying, if there's any bear that enters into human territory and it feels comfortable to go in and out as it pleases, it's a threat. It needs to be eliminated. No excuses. It must die.
It may seem cruel, but if a creature like this is poking around a place where people live, especially children, where they sleep and play, it helps to skip to the end as quickly as possible.
Exactly. And to me, this is not cruel. It's necessity. It's essential for survival, especially when you live in an area that is surrounded by these types of creatures. You can show no mercy to them. No mercy at all. They must die.
The shorter the story, the better, to be honest. I often see videos or read articles about backpackers and campers who had a close call, but the bear ended up leaving them alone. And people like the video because it's such a good example of how nature and mankind can live in harmony among the forest elves.
I find this very idiotic. This type of, you go into nature reserves and you get out your car and you look at the animals and you think, oh, it's a nice little toy or it's a Pokemon, you can pet it, you can give it food. We should not be doing things like that with wild animals. They must understand that there is a boundary to how far they can go, and just as much as humanity, we must make sure that we have a boundary to how far we can interact with wild animals, so that there is no mix-up where this animal starts thinking that, you know what, I can kill you, I can eat you, and nothing's going to happen. Just like in the game reserves in South Africa, the Kruger National Park, it is explicitly told to all those who enter into our game reserves that you must stay in your cars. You must make sure that your windows are, sealed, that you don't put down your window. Because the moment you put down your window, you start making noises, or you start putting out your hand or your face out, the lions and other carnivorous animals will be looking at you, and they will take advantage of that. They will try to attack you. They will eat you. They will kill you. These things are not your toys. They are not your pets. They are wild animals. And you must respect that. If you don't, you will die. So I really don't like, when people go to game reserves and they don't respect the fact that they're in a wild area. They think that this is a theme park where they can just drive around, outside of their cars, or put down their windows, or drive a convertible and just, thinking that they're enjoying a theme park. Once these animals start getting used to humans in this sort of way, they will see us as food and they will attack.
But that's wrong. Stuff like this is teaching the bear that interacting with humans has no consequences.
Exactly.
Even using mace to deter a bear is imprinting very strong emotions on said bear, and I doubt you'd like to be on the receiving end of those strong emotions. Perhaps they remember the bitter taste. Stuff like this is a community effort. It's our advantage as humans. Failure to act could very well result in someone else being dragged to hell.
Sorry guys, I was just having a call. Let's continue. Yes.
End of those strong emotions. Perhaps they remember the bitter taste. Stuff like this is a community effort. It's our advantage as humans. Failure to act could very well result in someone else being dragged to hell. So personally, I'm inclined to say it's irresponsible to live in brown bear country without being proficient with a weapon that could neutralize a bear, not just deter it. And that
Indeed.
goes for black bears too, but to a far lesser extent. Because like I think I said, your close call could be someone else's nightmare. To live in the habitat of stuff like brown bears or polar bears or tigers or lions or leopards or Komodo dragons or bull white and tiger sharks or crocodiles and alligators is to accept that you are food. Risky food, but food nonetheless. And living creatures will always put their own survival over your warm feelings for nature. And
Yes.
they'll certainly put their survival over yours. And regarding poor Abe Mayu, this is why I think feminism is important. If Mayu had access to a firearm and had been trained how to use it, maybe she would have lived to tell of a very close call. And this all would have been nothing more than a story about the time the bear came through the wall, and we probably would never have heard of it. Now, to be fair, there's certainly a chance it wouldn't have helped much, depending on where the weapon was in relation to the bear, and if she had warning or not. But if she had access to a firearm that she knew how to use, I think she very well could have survived this. And even if she didn't, there's a good chance the bear wouldn't have either. And that's the difference between a martyr and a hero, by the way. I've read comments on unrelated videos where people say, you think you really need a gun, or you think a gun would have helped? Maybe, maybe not, but it would have felt a hell of a lot better than firewood. So
Any sort of advantage is an advantage. Any sort of advantage is an advantage. And it can tip the scales to your victory. Never underestimate any sort of weapon that is going to be useful in this type of situation. That's why I'm saying, if they don't have access to guns, then machetes, spears, a sword. I mean, this is sword country, Japan. This is sword country. They manufacture those weapons with such precision and perfection. It's an artistry to them. I am sure there are people, weaponsmiths, who are selling such weapons. These are the things that they would need to protect themselves in such very dangerous areas that are dominated by these bears. If you don't have an access to a gun, then a sword. There's no excuse.
I think luck, the awareness of a warm winter's effect on bears, a proper response, and proactivity could have played a role in preventing this incident. But I'm also a realist, and I know that sometimes stuff just happens. A lot of people have forgotten or ignore that the US's conservation president was an avid hunter, and that's how that works. Because in order to properly love anything, you need to understand its potential to destroy you. And if you let it destroy you, then you won't love it anymore. You'll fear it. Just the other day, I saw a video where a lion looks after a baby antelope, or gazelle, I don't remember what it was. And you think, could this really happen? Then it cuts to 2 years later, and they're both older, and the gazelle became a wildebeest, and they gallop off into the sunset. And the comments say stuff like, it seems like animals have more humanity than man.
I don't get those comments. I honestly don't get them. Just because of this one abnormality, now all of a sudden, they have bigger hearts than human beings. You're in for a shock of your life. If you stand before a lion, you're in for a shock of your life.
It's like, no, that's wrong. Lions will keep prey alive for as long as possible if they've eaten recently, especially in populations close to the equator. There's no love, no maternal thing going on, nothing like that.
Just instinct.
I once found my cat playing with a mouse. It was very much alive, but it certainly wasn't free to leave. Just this last summer in Tanzania, 4 brothers between the ages of 9 and 11 were looking for a calf when they were ambushed by a lioness. 3 of them were killed. One of the brothers, he was 10 years old, survived by climbing a nearby tree. He said, quote, I held on to the tree all night long. I saw my brothers eaten by the lioness. It was very painful. It was all bones that I saw when I scaled down and ran away in the morning. And like I said, being alive doesn't mean free to leave. They suffered greatly. At the time of the attack, the lioness wore a GPS high-frequency collar, and she was being monitored. And after this incident, she was relocated to an undisclosed location. In Tanzania alone, no less than 36, quote, problem lions have been relocated, all of which were either man-eaters or, quote, too comfortable, whatever that means.
They need to die. They need to die. They're man-eaters, or they're too comfortable around what? Human beings. They need to die.
In response to this particular incident, Daniel Orkery, a former ward counselor in the Tanzanian park, said, quote, when a lion pounces on a human, the attack is usually to weaken him so that the predator can escape. A lioness rarely attacks children. The worst she can do is to tease or threaten them. The worst she can do is to tease or threaten them. The worst she can do is to tease or threaten them. This fantasy is not reserved for fools on Facebook. And it's hard because I don't want to live in a world without lions, but at the same time, I don't sit on a pedestal of privilege and tisk-tisk every time I hear about a lion being shot. I don't want a lion to get shot, but I also don't want people eaten alive.
Exactly. I agree 100%. I don't want lions to go extinct. I don't want these brown bears to go extinct. But we have to understand the reality of the places where we live. We need to respect that. We need to make sure that there are boundaries to how far these animals can go and how far we as humans can go. So that situations like this, don't occur. And really, any animal, especially these types of animals, these types of carnivorous apex predator animals, if they have this understanding that they can come close to human beings and that they can attack us and kill us and eat us, they must be killed. They must be killed. There is no form of rehabilitation that's really going to change this mindset in them. They must be killed. I know it sounds heartless or it sounds evil. It sounds like as if I am someone who doesn't really care about nature. I do, but we must find a balance between the two, between nature and human progression or human development. We must find a balance, or else nothing is going to be left of these creatures or these animals. They'll go extinct.
And I certainly don't want to sit here in my reasonably tame environment and then judge the actions of those who run the very real risk of being dragged to hell. Just imagine being this kid, and have some forestry official tell you that the worst thing a lion can do is tease or threaten. Oh yeah, and that the lioness has done that before, and has been relocated, so we'll do it again. But of course they don't disclose where, or the nature of the prior offenses. It's truly unbelievable. Imagine trying to explain where we are today to someone like John Henry Patterson. I just worry about people's frame of mind.
It's insane. It's just insane.
To think that lions and bears secretly want to be your friend is absolute fantasy and shows just how removed some people have become. It makes me think of our tens of thousands of year old ancestors rolling over in their very elusive graves. Anyway, hopefully you liked this video. Like it if you did, and subscribe to keep updated. And as always, thanks an awful lot for listening, and stay safe out there.
Whew, wow. Wow, this was good. This was really, really, really good. Yes, that is it with the Sankebetsu brown bear incident made on the Bob Gymlan YouTube channel, requested by Kelly McPherson 8033. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for this request. It's been really, really, really good. Also, thank you to Bob for making this video about this incident and, trying to stitch the story in a way that would be understandable and, perfectly packaged for us, the viewers. You really did a good job on it, and really, I find no fault in your work here. I really don't. It's quite good, and yeah, this story was really frustrating. Very, very, very frustrating. I was getting angry. I was really getting angry as the story started progressing, just trying to understand the people who live in that area, trying to understand the police. I was celebrating that the fact that the police were going out on this situation as fast as they did. I was really impressed by that. The fact that 50 men with their guns are heading over to the homestead of Ishiguro. Was it Ishiguro or Maiko's homestead? But yes, they were going out there to defend those families, and I was really impressed by that. And then my hope just shattered when all 50 of them left their key positions and headed out to go and search for one bear, leaving the families, leaving the civilians exposed to the threat that was coming towards them. And the situation with Yamamoto and him not really wanting to get into this situation because he's been dealing with his own personal situations, and how he finally decided that I'm going to go out there, I'm going to try and help out this family that I previously said no to. And that was good. That was something that really I felt as if there was going to be light at the end of the tunnel, because my respect for the police just dissipated after what they did. It just evaporated. I was so disappointed and heartbroken. Also, when it comes to the community that lives amongst these apex predators, why don't they have weapons to defend themselves? This is like the $1 trillion question. How is it that they've been living there for so long amongst these creatures, but they don't have weapons to defend themselves against these creatures? The hunters, the Matagi hunters, do they need to be paid before they have an initiative to hunt out these animals, or do they do it under their own, under their own agency or their own decision making, that they're going to go out there and hunt wild animals, or should I say wild bears, that are threatening human communities? Because they were needed in this entire situation. They were needed. Not just Mr. Yamamoto, but these specific hunters as well that hunt these bears. They were needed in this type of situation. And it's unfortunate that they were not there. Like how Mr. Ikaida called them to his homestead. I would have expected them to also be here for this entire situation. But they were nowhere to be found. So yeah, that was just a bit disappointing there as well. But like I stated, maybe they need monetary compensation before they do the job. Yeah. In terms of Kasaragi and the fact that he killed a total of 12 people, I think there's more people have died. I think so. It's just that we don't have information about it, but I suspect that more and more people have died at the hands or at the jaws of this creature. hold on, guys. All right. What was I saying again? I had a long discussion on the phone. Sorry, guys. Oh yes, I did state that I think the bear Kasaragi or Kasaragoki. Yes, I think this bear has killed a lot more people. We just don't have the information about it. But I suspect that this bear has killed more people than what has been confirmed. Definitely. Um, and really, at the end of all of this, this is just a story that needs to be understood by many people, that we can love nature, we can love the animals that are within nature, but you must understand that there are wild animals and they will kill you. You must respect them. You must understand them, that they are not toys, they are not pets, they are not the animals that you see in Lion King. They are not. These animals will kill you. They will eat you. And if you don't understand this, you might become a victim. And then you would want to have revenge. You'd want the government or authorities to kill this animal that has killed your loved ones, or that has eaten half of your body. You'd want revenge on that animal. But because of your lack of understanding, your ignorance, your childish attitude in how you conduct yourself around wild animals, they are the ones that are going to be paying the price. So I think this story is a very good example on how we should conduct ourselves with wild animals, and how we conduct ourselves when we're living amongst wild animals. Yes, they can be seen to be cute sometimes, or cuddly or friendly, but these things are not your friends. They are not. You must always have a boundary. You must know how far you can go. Don't let them get used to you. Don't offer them food. Stop doing that. Because one day they're going to really take advantage of your kindness and see you as a potential prey to be consumed. And we don't want that. We don't. Yeah. Alright guys, that's it. Thank you again to Kelly McPherson for the request. Thank you also to Bob Gymlan for making this video. And yes, I thoroughly enjoyed myself with this one. It's been very, very good. Remember guys, if you want to check out the original video as well as Bob Gymlan's YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. If you like my reaction, give it a like, comment and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be updated with my latest videos. And I'll see you guys next time. Okay? Bye-bye.